Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber. Today's guest is Kieran Ramsey, who retired as an FBI Assistant Director after serving 32 years in federal law enforcement, as well as the U.S. intelligence community. Today, he is going to reflect back over his 30-plus year career and share his involvement in several shocking and very serious investigations that involve people that didn't deserve what happened to them. And not only are we going to be discussing these crimes, but also the emotional toll, even today, that those crimes had on Kieran and others that worked alongside him. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me here today and share your experiences, and welcome.
Jim, thanks so much. It's really a privilege and an honor to join you today.
I appreciate you. Thank you. I'm confident that listeners today are going to find your discussion powerful and thought-provoking. You and I are relatively new acquaintances. Could you share how we met up?
And yeah, it's a small world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You recently had a podcast where your guest was a guy by the name of Antonio Farias, who retired as an HSI, Special Agent Supervisor up in Kansas. Well, Tony, as I know him, was my first partner in what was then U.S. Customs down in Laredo, Texas. I got to Laredo, Texas in about 1994, and it was a tiny little town at the time with a very small, if you remember, OE Office of Enforcement Operations.
Sure.
And it was RAC Laredo under SAC San Antonio. And I was super fortunate because I showed up. I happened to be the only, quite honestly, the only white guy that showed up that spoke Spanish. And immediately was taken under the wing by a group of guys, including Tony. And Tony was my partner for the next 5 years while I was in Laredo. And his son hosted your podcast interview with him. And I immediately watched it. I still keep in touch with Tony to this day. And I was so moved by your conversation, by the fact that you elicited from him his struggles with anxiety throughout his career. Now, I knew about those, and I think I had shared with you previously. We used to joke that Tony was like Mr. T when it came to flying. Like he hated to fly, and we used to fly all over the country in U.S. Customs aircraft, delivering controlled deliveries of marijuana, coke, and heroin and everything. But if there was an option to drive, Tony's like, "No, bro, we're driving." But to hear him describe his struggles with anxiety throughout his career it really moved me. I was so impressed that you got him to share, and I was so impressed that he shared so openly that I immediately called him. I'm like, dude, that was phenomenal. What a great interview. And we started talking. He's like, I'm going to call Jim right now, and I'm going to tell him you need to be a guest on his podcast too, because you've had all this stuff in your career. I'm like, nah, don't worry about that. But yet here we are today.
Right. Here we are, and I'm very appreciative of that. I thank you again. You know, I was fortunate as well to work alongside Tony in Chicago when he was up there for a couple of years. That's where our paths crossed, and he was just the kind of guy that you instantly admire. You like that guy. You know, he had a great energy, an incredible work ethic, and just genuinely a good human being. And, you know, I just looked up to him literally and figuratively. You know, he's such an imposing figure. And, you know, even more so now that, you know, we're all retired. Tony's retired, you're retired, I'm retired. And when he decided to do the podcast and shared such personal feelings and thoughts and behaviors, I just respected him so much more, so much more. So, you know, I'm glad he introduced us. I'm glad I was fortunate to work with him as well. So, those are kind words from you. I appreciate it. You know,
Shout out to Tony, without a doubt, for bringing us together.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the old school customs right up here in the background.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Never forget it.
Right. Yeah. You know, and speaking of Tony, he's like, hey, you're going to talk to him today. I want you to mention a couple things. So first, the nickname. You had a nickname or two. What was that about?
So when I first got there, I was nicknamed Irish because I had come from Boston. So here was a Boston kid that ends up on the Mexican border and clearly stood out in most occasions. In fact, I refused to buy cowboy boots or ropers, as maybe you know, a lot of folks down there. They didn't like cowboy boots. They bought ropers because they were more comfortable. I refused and only wore hiking boots. So here I am, this white guy, and back then I had long, beautiful blonde hair that I ended up with a Steven Seagal ponytail, but just stood out all day long. But then I quickly got another nickname, which in fact is a little term of derision in some instances. But if it's used amongst close friends and stuff, it's a term of affection, given again who I was, and that was Wedo. Wedo means essentially white guy, and my nickname became Wedo with almost everybody. And then when my wife, my then girlfriend, now wife, joined me down there, she became Weta. And to this day, my wife and I refer to each other as Wedo and Weta. So I will call my wife, "Hey Weta, what about what's for dinner?" And she'll yell at me, "Wedo, make your own dinner," or something like that.
That's awesome. I've always been kind of envious of folks that I worked with that had cool nicknames. You know, being Jim, I really didn't have anything cool that they called me. It was just Jim. So thanks for sharing that. And one
Yeah.
last thing that he had mentioned was he said, ask him about an undercover case that he had worked while we were all together down in Laredo. So, and that's all he mentioned. I don't know the details, so I'm gonna bounce that off you.
So I'm pretty sure I know which one he's talking about. So again, white guy in Laredo, but I spoke Spanish. I also have heritage from New York and Boston in kind of equal measures. My mother was from Boston, my father was from Brooklyn. But guess how that marriage ended? It did. You can't have a Red Sox fan married to a Yankees fan. But anyway, I was able to go and get my undercover agent certification early on while I was down there. And I was excited to do something. And my very first undercover case, all of a sudden, I'm going to be the point person. I'm going to be going to pick up the load, and then we're going to take it wherever. So we're doing all this planning, and I'm fairly nervous. Look, I'm a very young guy. In fact, when I got to Laredo, I was 21 years old. I had just
Oh,
graduated
wow.
college. At this point, I was maybe 23, so still a very young guy. I doubt my prefrontal cortex was even fully formed at the point. But pretty bold. So we agree. I'm going to be the undercover. I'm going to go drive up to this house and pick it up. But we didn't know where we were going. And Tony is all over me like a mother hen. And he was he was a great partner, but he took protecting his partner very seriously. So I could tell he was stressed too. And he's like, "Now, Wedo, if this happens, this, and Wedo, if you're going to do this, do that, and Wedo, the call sign is this, and the emergency sign is that, and Wedo, think that." And I'm like, "Okay, I got it." And then all of a sudden, we get the address from the bad guys. They text, "Hey, come to this place." And I'm looking at it, I'm like, huh, this couldn't be. And sure enough, this was back before the days of GPS and everything. We all had those map books, if you remember.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Looking on the map, I'm like, oh boy. And as I'm driving there, I'm like, oh boy. Well, this house was literally 2 blocks away from my apartment.
Oh,
2 blocks away. So I'm pulling in there and I'm like, holy crap, what if these guys have seen me in the neighborhood? I have a dog. I walk the dog all the time. And what if this and what if they've seen me at the, the HEB down the street and oh my God, like I'm like, oh, there's no way.
yeah.
But we go with it, and I pull up to this house. The garage opens. They motion me, and I'm driving a van, a panel van. So I pull the van in, open the door, and they don't really say anything to me. They just open the door and just start throwing the bales in, like as quickly as they can. And the guy looks at me. He's like, "Está bien?" I'm like, "Está bien." And we pull out, but like the entire time I'm like shaking, like, oh God, please don't let them realize they saw that white guy at the store the other day and this
Right.
and that and the other thing. In the end, that was fine. That portion was fine. But then we do a controlled delivery to Atlanta with the load. And again, I'm still the undercover. So I'm now going to hand over the load to these guys in Atlanta. And sure enough, they want it handed over at a shipping company. So we get the cooperation of the shipping company. Again, we have everything set up. Tony's all over, like, hey, let's think about this, let's think about that. And the case agent on that side of things actually is a classmate of mine from FLETC.
Hmm.
So I think, okay, we're good to go. And sure enough, things start proceeding and I'm there waiting. These guys pull up and now it's my turn. I throw in the bales and everything, have a little quick conversation in Spanish, nothing too detailed. And guys take off. So then I go back to my car. I'm sitting there making sure no one else is coming around, and then I'm listening to the radio. And what I'm hearing on the radio is, does anybody have them? Does anybody have them? Does anybody have eyes on? Does anybody have eyes on? Does anybody? Where? They lost it. The
Oh,
the the van drove away, and it was just one of those things. So
yeah.
Tony calls me or gets me on the radio. He comes screaming around. He's like, "Get in, bro. Let's go. These guys don't, who knows what happened, but you and I got to go find this, and then we'll figure out if we do find it. You're gonna pop out, and we'll figure something out." So we're screaming around Atlanta all over the place. Uh, Eventually, we find one of the guys that had picked up the load, but he's not with it anymore, and he plays immediately dumb. No say nada, no say nada, the whole 9 yards. We never find the load.
Oh,
So my
man.
first undercover caper, where not only do I like fear I'm going to be burned because we picked up the load 2 blocks from where I was living, then we lose the load on the backside and it ends up into back then, as you remember, internal affairs and a red book. Thankfully,
Hmm.
no one did anything wrong on our end. There was no
Right.
malintent. There was nothing like that, but it was quite a mess.
Man, that's quite a story. As an undercover in my career too, I can just my heart's tightening as you're telling that story. That's incredible. Too close to
Yeah,
home there.
I can honestly tell you, I didn't do a lot of undercover at all. Tony did a bunch later on in his
Hmm.
career. I did a handful of things. Most often it was kind of secondary roles. But that experience alone, like really, that pucker factor made me appreciate what the undercover role is and
Yep,
what can happen.
absolutely. Wow, that's a fantastic story. Hey, but you've got such a career under your belt here. Before we, drill down on our topic today, I'd like to go over and read your bio for listeners that might not be familiar with you. Would that be all right if I do that?
Sure, sure, sure.
All right, here we go. After a 32-year career in federal law enforcement and the U.S. intelligence community, Kieran Ramsey joined Global Reach to continue his personal commitment to bring Americans home, spearheading massive investigations to include the Boston Marathon bombing, the killing of a U.S. diplomat overseas, the assassination of an internationally renowned journalist, and multiple kidnapping hostage cases. Kieran is also able to harness the power of partnership across agencies and governments in direct support of victims and their families. Kieran most recently served at the FBI's highest echelon of executive leadership as an assistant director of the FBI's senior representative to another U.S. intelligence community agency. This assignment required his resourcefulness and expertise to ensure U.S. intelligence community capabilities and authorities were fully integrated in not only hostage situations, but across the entire range of national security threats, to include counterterrorism, counterespionage, cyber, and transnational organized crime. Kieran is already a well-known leader in the hostage space, having served as the third director of the U.S. government's Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, wherein he led the interagency efforts through a period of great change that saw the successful return of numerous hostages and unlawful detainees. He further established deep relationships with former hostages, hostage families, and other hostage advocacy groups, which continue to this day. Kieran's other positions across his lengthy career included multiple domestic office postings, as well as cross-cultural assignments as a diplomat and the senior FBI official in U.S. embassies in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. His reputation as a fixer placed him in some of the most challenging assignments, ranging from the Regime Crimes Task Force in Iraq in 2004 to navigating FBI support to local law enforcement during the period of civil unrest in Portland, Oregon in 2020. He also led one of the FBI's evidence response teams in New York in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Kieran has been honored with numerous accolades and awards across his career for a variety of investigations, to include the U.S. Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association Award, the International Association of Chiefs of Police Award, and the International Narcotics Enforcement Officers Award. He holds a bachelor's degree from Northeastern University and a master's degree from Georgetown University, and is a former adjunct faculty member for the FBI. Kieran, that's a tremendous career and an incredible bio, and I'm so glad you're here to talk to us today.
Thank you. If I could have you redo that, but with my kids sitting at the dinner table, maybe they'll listen to me a little more.
Hey, I would. Well, let me ask you this. Why did you get into law enforcement? We talked about a couple of your experiences, but reflecting back, what took you down the career path to law enforcement and specifically the Bureau?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, growing up, I mostly grew up on Long Island in New York. And admittedly, I was a challenge for my parents, and I'd gotten into trouble a couple of times. And I remember a distinct conversation where my father asked me, "So what are your priorities, kid? Like, what are you hoping to do?" And this was in high school where I was getting ready to apply for colleges and everything. And it really struck a chord with me, like, okay, I can continue to screw up and be a knucklehead, or I can get my act together. So that was one thing. Second thing, I had a friend growing up whose dad was a homicide detective, and I just loved listening to stories that he used to tell. Was fascinated by them. Third, when I went to Northeastern, I chose Northeastern primarily because I was a swimmer at the time, and I thought I was going to swim on their swim team, which was a D1 swim team. But I also chose it because it had a criminal justice program. And I had taken a criminal justice class my senior year of high school. And yet again, it resonated with me in the sense that it made me realize, okay, when I'm an adult in a career, I want something that's intellectually challenging, but I want some physicality to it as well. And dare I say, I probably want a little risk. And that's not to say that I'm an adrenaline junkie by any means, or I'm a huge risk taker or a gambler or anything like that. Not at all. But I saw in that, the criminal justice course and learning more about law enforcement and better yet, federal law enforcement, knowing that you could go all over the country, if not around the world, on some cool things. And, as we're growing up, we were all kids at the same time watching TV and movies, and you're like, oh, wow, that looks so cool.
Yep.
So the cool element was there. But then ultimately, when I went to Northeastern and got into the criminal justice program, they had a co-op program that was very well known across customs back then as well, where you would be a paid intern, what we call a co-op student.
Right.
You would go to headquarters for at least 2 tours during your academic years. And if you did well and they were hiring, you could graduate day, on a Tuesday or Wednesday and be hired by Friday, and be on your way to your assignment. And at the time, the top co-ops were DEA, Customs, Marshals, and INS. And admittedly, DEA seemed to have a higher cachet. And a good friend of mine, he's a chief of police up in Massachusetts, Roy Frost. He and I went for the DEA one. He beat me out, and I was a little dejected, but I'm like, okay, I'm going
Right.
for the customs one. And I got into the customs co-op, and it just opened my eyes immediately when I got into that program as to how cool of an agency customs was at the time, but what a world there was for law enforcement and federal law enforcement at that, and the things that you could get involved in, the intellectual stimulation and challenge you would get, the service that you could really do for not only for your local country, but seemingly, to sound corny, for the country. And it really just inspired me further. Um, as you noted before, I got to Laredo. I had a phenomenal start to my career in Laredo. I saw more drugs and helped seize more drugs than most people will see in their career. It was unbelievable the amount of drugs that we were seeing and seizing and everything. But after about 5 years, my then girlfriend, who had come down finally after a couple of years, now wife, said, "Hey, professionally, I can't get a career here in Laredo, so we got to go somewhere else." And unfortunately, Customs was still very much focused on the southern border buildup at the time, post NAFTA. There were very few opportunities. I had one small opportunity to go to New Haven because I spoke Spanish, and they were like, "Look, we need somebody to talk with the Colombians coming off the ships, and maybe you could do that and this." But at the same time, I heard FBI was hiring, so I threw my application in for them and figured, look, what's the worst they're going to do? I'll switch agencies and I'll start in Laredo, and then maybe I can get off the border that way. And sure enough, that's kind of what happened. I went in, got hired by FBI, and ultimately got assigned to Seattle, Washington from there. And that's kind of my journey as to what led me, really starting in Laredo with Customs, but then springboard into FBI in Seattle, and then off the rest of the 30 years.
Yeah, you stole my word. I was going to say that's an impressive journey. I have to agree with you wholeheartedly about customs. I didn't get on until just at the beginning of 2001. And when I got on board there, I really didn't, as I was going through the application process, I didn't really realize the great things that agency did. And once I got on board, holy cow, those were some of the best times of my entire career. So, I agree with you there. That was a fantastic agency.
It was, and I'll add one thing that I always emphasize for my customs veteran brethren out there. Um, Back then with customs, the good agents that you came across, because not to say everybody was equal, but the really good agents were always really good people too. And I really came to love that. And customs really, when it came to jurisdiction and authority, was really only second to the FBI in terms of breadth of authority. In fact, it was a little more than the FBI if you touched anything to the border. But the variety of stuff that you could do with customs, the types of cases that you could do, I did a huge case on the smuggling of chili peppers. Now,
Yeah.
in some ways, you'd be like, "Oh, why is that significant or anything?" But when you realize, there were recalls, E. coli recalls for peppers that were coming into the U.S. across the country back then, that people were getting sick and dying. So we did one of the first big cases, and it was cool. We did all this tech stuff, and we saw how these brokers were manipulating the system, and not through any malfeasance or even incompetence, just they had figured out how to get things through the system without anybody in customs realizing it before it was too late. So things like that were just fascinating, the amount of opportunities. And, I left begrudgingly. In fact, my first year in the FBI, I really considered going back. Uh,
Hmm.
Obviously, I think it was 9/11 that changed any notion that I would go back and I would just stick to what I was doing and move forward. But I missed customs a lot after I left.
Yep. I see why. I see why. Let's kind of shift a little bit here. Talking with you and reading your bio, You reference working in the U.S. intelligence community, and I know some of that information is classified or restricted or that type of thing. What, if anything, for the benefit of listeners out there, what could you share about your role in the intelligence community throughout your career?
Sure. I'm with the FBI. They're one of 17, agencies that are considered part of the U.S. intelligence community. So having had a lot of interaction crossing all these other three-letter agencies and the Department of Defense and State Department and everyone else, you realize that this really it's a global world where adversaries don't care about borders at all. And if they can take advantage or gain profit or do damage to us in any setting possible, they will. So it becomes incredibly imperative to make sure that we're working together. And I say this all the time publicly, we use 9/11 really probably as the proper benchmark of what failure actually looks like when we don't
Mhm.
work together. And there's been a ton of books and movies and I myself did my thesis on the 9/11 Commission report and the following WMD Commission report after that as to, this is what failure looks like, and we cannot allow that to happen again. So fast forward years later, having worked with any number of agencies in any number of settings domestically and internationally, really my capstone assignment to my career was this last year where I was back in DC. I was an assistant director for the FBI, but I was on loan to the U.S. intelligence community. And it was in a role to make sure that our authorities as the FBI and capabilities were integrated with the U.S. intelligence community, meaning, the FBI is not just going off and doing its own thing this way, and intelligence community agencies are doing this way, and we're only hurting ourselves and putting at risk, a repeat of a failure in some context against terrorism, against state adversaries that are committing espionage against us, against cyber attackers, against transnational organized crime. So it was a fascinating role that I had to really think strategically as to how to make sure let's make sure that we are working not just from a deconfliction perspective, meaning, okay, we're going to tell you we're doing this just so you know, not just working from a cooperation perspective. Hey, we should share some of this. Not even just working from a collaboration perspective where we're actually sitting at the table and planning, but really, and this is a key word that both, a lot of the former directors of the intelligence community used to use, we are doing this in an integrated manner, meaning everything we do is dependent on everything they do, and everything we plan is dependent on what they plan. And we are seeing the sequencing for those plans and these operations and the collection of this intelligence and the analysis of that intelligence. We are doing it all together to make sure everybody is seeing the fullest picture possible. And then the plans that we are going to bring forth to combat whatever adversary it is are going to do the most damage to them, are going to be the most effective possible so that we're defeating those threats.
That's a great description. That's a great explanation. And thank goodness for guys like you that did that to keep us as a nation more secure after the horrific 9/11 event. So great explanation. I appreciate that. You
Thanks.
know, I think it's probably time to roll up our sleeves and jump into our conversation here, and we're going to talk about your reflections over your career about some specific individuals. And essentially at this portion, I'm going to kind of open it up to you and let you discuss this and share what you'd like to share. And I'll try not to interrupt you, but I might interject a question or two as we go along here. And I think one of the first individuals that you're going to discuss is Sophia Juarez. And this was a 4-year-old girl who disappeared from Kennewick, Washington in 2003. And it was the day before her 5th birthday. Her case, if I'm correct on this, was the first to actually activate an Amber Alert in the state of Washington, I
Yeah.
believe. And having said that, if I misstate anything, as we go along here. I want you to correct me, because you lived it, you worked it, you investigated it, and I don't want to misstate anything as we move along here. So, having said that, why don't you kind of walk us through this particular investigation?
Yeah, no worries. And I'll share with you the idea for this conversation that we're going to have about some of these cases really came upon reflection of that other podcast that you mentioned of Tony's reflection as to the anxiety that he had to overcome through his career. And as I sit here now, retired, not too long after retiring, only back in January, but reflecting on this career. I think I gave you the title "Names That Haunt Me," but it really should be called "Images That Haunt Me," and it's photos of some of these people that were victims. That not all of them, most of them, did not see the proper justice that was due to them for the horrible circumstances, and the fact that images of them from perhaps a photo or news footage that I saw in the middle of whatever the investigation was, counteracted by other things I saw as a result of the investigation. So Sophia Juarez, as you mentioned, she's a four-year-old little girl that goes missing in Kennewick, Washington, the day before her 5th birthday. Now, at the time, I'm an FBI agent assigned to Seattle, Washington. I'm also the coordinator for what's called our evidence response team, or we affectionately call it the ERT team. The ERT team is the FBI's forensics team. It's their CSI team. Certainly not like the TV show. We don't collect things in an hour with lasers, go back to the
Right.
office, figure it all out, and lay it out. The ERT team is meant to go out and document a crime scene, collect the evidence, preserve it, and then we ship it to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, where the real nuts and bolts of the forensic examination happens. Sometimes in bigger cases, the lab comes out and joins us. Other times, perhaps we work with another agency's forensics crime scene team for whatever the scene is. It just varies. But it was a great assignment, and I sought it out purposefully because, again, I had mentioned, I was always fascinated by stories from my friend's father, who was a homicide detective. And, generally speaking, the FBI actually doesn't work a lot of homicides, believe it or not, because homicide isn't a federal crime. It's only a crime if it occurs on federal reservation or federal property, or there's some other extraterritorial or jurisdictional thing that makes it a federal crime. And I saw the possibility to work on the ERT team, knowing that I would get involved in homicides, in rapes, in kidnappings, in arsons, in bombings, in terrorist attacks, which perhaps is a little maybe morbid and speaks to my psyche. I don't know. But at the same time, I always found it fascinating. So I got on with the ERT team. I became the coordinator. And let's get to Sophia then. So Sophia is a 4-year-old little girl, as you mentioned. She's living in Kennewick, Washington with her family or extended family. Her mom, Maria, her grandmother, the grandmother's boyfriend, some aunts and uncles that are kind of in the same age range as she is. It's a big extended family. And the day before her 5th birthday, at night, it's a cold night, February in Kennewick, Washington, not necessarily springtime weather, or I mean, it's chilly out there. There's some confusion between family members. She was thought to have gone to the store with some family member. That person comes back and they're like, no, I didn't have Sophia with me. I don't know what you're talking about. So they scramble around for an hour and then they call Kennewick Police. Kennewick Police is a really great, capable agency. They called our local FBI resident agency office, meaning our smaller office that's closest to Kennewick there. They immediately go out and then they immediately pick up the phone and call us and say, hey, we have a possible kidnapping here. Let's get out here. You mentioned it was the first time an Amber Alert was utilized by the Washington State Patrol, obviously, and tragically unsuccessful. But it escalates fairly quickly. And before dawn that next morning, we have a sea of law enforcement responding to help out with this, and a sea of volunteers too. And I'll talk about some other missing persons cases that I was involved in later. But anytime you see something like that, especially of a juvenile, especially of a child of what we call tender years, which is usually below the age of 8, there's a sense of urgency there, and people show up and they're like, "Hey, we got to find this kid," and that was the case with Sophia. So we get there before dawn the next morning. We go screaming out from Seattle to Kennewick, which is a bit of a drive, and we're teamed up right away with the Washington State Patrol's forensic crime scene team. I forget what I think it was their crime scene response team, if I recall that correctly. And we're searching anywhere and everywhere they send us to. First we searched the house that she was living in to see, okay, is there any indication of any foul play here? Because early on, the detectives that were responsible felt that there were enough indicators of a potential kidnapping that's why they kind of hit the button and said, hey, all hands on deck.
Sure, that makes sense.
So, and for me, it was really my first experience of a full-blown kidnapping matter that didn't turn into a homicide investigation fairly quickly, because that happens a lot too, right? We'll have a call for a kidnapping, and within the first 48 hours, it's realized it's actually a homicide, and kind of things change significantly at that point. That wasn't the case, and as I mentioned, there's a palpable emotion, there's a palpable pressure when you can see the family, they're there, the community's coming out, friends and neighbors, and you're a human being too. You're like, oh, we got to find this little girl. She's 4 years old. It was cold that night. It was, in the 30s at best. She didn't just wander off on her own or hop in a cab and go to the airport or something. And she's not of an age where she's going to run away,
Right.
because she's pissed at mom or dad. I mean, she's 4 years old. So we were pretty relentless when we got in there to do anything and everything we could, from searching anywhere they kind of led us to and directed us to. And we probably searched over a dozen, residences, cars, storage sites, you name it, wherever we could. We were looking at that. And one of the weird things, I shouldn't say it's weird, but one of the interesting things that you do in a typical potential kidnapping case, is you start to look up every registered sex offender in the area. And you always, without a doubt, find sex offenders that are not properly registered in the area. And I want to say there was a lot in that area for whatever reason. I think at one point we even ended up searching the house of the mom of some guy that had recently been convicted of some brutal murder that was pretty well known in the area. So it just shows you we were trying to turn over every stone in hopes that we would get lucky with some indication that she's here, that she's there, she's wherever we can. They brought in scent dogs, which can sometimes be a great tool. Sometimes they don't work out, but whatever scent dog I think they brought in, I remember it came right out of the house, went down the block, made a right, and started going up the block, and then everybody's excited, and this dog's moving like it's onto something, and then it just gone. The dog stops, and we're like, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Needless to say, we were there for I forget if it was a full week or just shy of a week, but needless to say, we don't find hiding anything really.
That has to be
where Sophie is.
That has to be physically and emotionally exhausting and draining, because you hit the nail on the head. When you're dealing with a missing child, there's an emotional, I don't know what you'd call it, tension, where you're being professional and you're doing your job, but there's that humanity aspect of it as well. Put yourself in the shoes of those family members. So I can only imagine how emotional and stressful that was while that was going on for that week.
And it was so impressive to see. The Kennewick Police Department isn't the largest department out there, but their team was incredibly diligent and focused and dogged in their efforts. All of the various law enforcement agencies that came out, our colleagues from Washington State Patrol were fantastic, and then the team I was with, these were all well-trained FBI personnel, and just dedicated, and everybody, you could feel that everybody to a person had that sense of urgency. Now, again, we didn't find anything. And fast forward, I've kept up with the case over the years. I'm not connected to any of the case team today or anything, but I've kept watch of it in the news, and there have been updates periodically. I think there were a couple of I want to say girls, but they were older, that claimed that they were Sophia and that they didn't really know who they were, and they kind of looked like Sophia. And Kennewick had to really still investigate that and run that down as to whether it's true or not. There were other sightings and all these, unfortunately false leads. But I think in the last couple of years, they've really locked onto an eyewitness account from that night that I don't necessarily recall myself, but it doesn't matter, that said that somebody saw Sophia being led away with a teenage boy, a younger teenage boy, and that possible teenage boy was kind of chuckling or laughing while Sophia was crying, and she entered into a van and off they went. And I think they put a lot of stock in that, even to this day. But unfortunately, it hasn't resulted in anything. And the tragic thing really is twofold. One, Sophia's obviously not been found, and we don't know what her fate has been or is. Two, I read that her mom, Maria, passed away about 6 years after Sophia went missing. And again, having seen the news and kept up on it and hearing reports about it, how she never gave up hope or faith that she would find her daughter, she passes away, only 6 years later. So you have this little girl who has not been found, or a family that still to this day has no answers. And this is where I come into that point of images that kind of haunt me still. And it's really of the fact that there was a widely used photo of Sophia at the time, and it's her in this little, pale hat with flowers on top and a little matching dress, and smiling. And forever, that's what that girl is going to look like to all of us, right? Anybody, and I'm sure this is the case with the investigators and the retired investigators from Kennewick and the surrounding communities that have never let that case go cold. I mean, my hat's off to them. They have, if you look on the Kennewick Washington police page, to this day, there's still a splash page about Sophia. So absolutely hats off to them. But the fact is, we have that photo, and that's the only photo that we will ever know of her, or that will be seared in our memory, without having anything corresponding as to what her fate was or is to this day.
Wow, that is heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking to hear. And I think you probably answered this question, but was there a moment during your investigation, I don't know, a tip, a lead, a false lead, an interaction with the family that really stuck with you over the years? I'm going to say it was, you answered that already with that photo scenario.
Yeah, I would tell you, the photo is what stuck with me over the years. Again, I have images, I think all of us do in law enforcement, of traumatic events that stick with us. And we all have a lot of trauma in our careers. I'm no different than anybody else. I'm sure you have the same compendium of other photos in your head or other images. But that photo itself is just kind of haunting, in that you have this smiling, innocent little 4-year-old girl that, despite the effort of literally hundreds of people in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, and no doubt thousands of man hours put in since her disappearance back then, and yet there are still no answers as to where she is today. And we can't have another photo or another image of her since, is, that sticks with you. It just does.
Yeah, that's a heavy thing to deal with. So yeah. Is there anything else about her case that we should cover or discuss? I mean, I think you pretty much covered, the details on it, but it's such a sad case.
Well, I think anybody to this day can still query on the internet Sophia Juarez, Kennewick, Washington. She's still listed in the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children website. She's on the splash page of Kennewick, Washington. So obviously, if anybody in your audience sees or hears this and thinks they have any information or knows of somebody that may have some information that could still, no matter what it is, still should reach out to the Kennewick, Washington Police Department and provide that, because again, that family, let alone little Sophia, deserves some measure of justice to find out what her fate was or is.
Right. That's a great point. That's a great point. So, we'll end with this, that there, however so slight, there is a possibility that she could be found. So, yeah,
I mean,
I echo what you said there.
Yeah, if she was a victim of homicide, I have to think we would have found some remains. And in fact, I know over the years we did some follow-up searches a year or two later, I want to say, where they thought they found remains, and sure enough, it wasn't connected or anything. But just don't know. Just don't know.
Let's move forward here and move on to the next case discussion. Who would you like to discuss at this point?
So I'll fast forward to another situation, another case, no less tragic, quite honestly, but in a very different setting. So in 2004, I was still officially assigned to the Seattle field office, but I was still, part of the evidence response team, and I got an assignment to what was called the Regime Crimes Task Force. So this was a team that was put together post-invasion of Iraq, the second invasion of Iraq, to really work on a war crimes or genocide case against the former Saddam Hussein regime. And I raised my hand because it sounded fascinating. They were going to bring together a team from across DOJ, and they needed a small cadre of people that were ERT trained from the FBI to be part of that. So myself and two of my colleagues, the head of the ERT down in Phoenix and the head of the ERT in Philly, who are still dear friends of mine to this day, we all volunteered, and we're like, yeah, we'll go. And off we went. And it was a fascinating assignment. First we went to headquarters to learn, the parameters of what the mission was going to be and how we were going to try and build a case of war crimes and genocide against the former regime. There were some interesting caveat or offshoots of this. There are a lot of people that know the story of after Saddam Hussein was captured, he was basically interviewed or interrogated by an FBI agent by the name of George Pirro. It was on 60 Minutes. I think George has written a book. That was very interesting. But anyway, we were sent to DC to kind of figure out how we were going to do this. And then it was on to Doha, Qatar, where we had to build up kind of an analytical cell there, because the military had already been taking tons of information, tons of documents, and we needed to get our hands on that, kind of make sense of it. And then a group of us would be sent forward into Iraq to actually go out, visibly see locations, try and collect evidence. And most of it, admittedly, was mass graves. Unfortunately, there were some very famous episodes or infamous episodes, tragic episodes of the Saddam Hussein regime where he gassed, certain groups of people in the south, in the swamps, in the north, the Kurds with chemical weapons, and then even killing women and children writ large. And in fact, we found, the Army Corps of Engineers found a mass grave that ultimately was proven just to be women and children. And it was pretty intense. And
Right.
Look, I'll be the first to say too, I was never in the military. So this was kind of really overwhelming. It was awe-inspiring and like, wow, like you're in a war zone, you're in Iraq. There's literally danger at every turn. We've got service members that are putting their lives on the line every single day, going out and doing these missions to secure whatever territory the government needed to. But things, as they always do, took a weird turn. And in the middle of September, I think it was like September 16th, our report comes out that three Western contractors had been kidnapped. So we were at base and we heard it, and we started following along. And long story short, two Americans and a Brit. So the two Americans were Jack Hensley, Eugene Armstrong, who also went by the nickname Jack, and a Brit named Kenneth Bigley, who were all there on engineering contracts to help rebuild Iraq post fall of the Saddam Hussein regime. They were taken hostage. They were kidnapped and taken hostage by an Al-Qaeda terrorist group affiliate, led by a guy by the name of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. He would later go on to great infamy for horrible, horrible terrorist attacks. But he was claiming responsibility for kidnapping these three Westerners. And he made a videotaped claim and put it out there, and it got out in the news that, look, unless all female Iraqi prisoners were released, he'd start killing these hostages one by one every 24 hours. And it was pretty chilling, to say the least. I don't think we had seen anything since maybe a couple of years before, something similar. In the case, a very famous case of Daniel Pearl, who was a journalist. I have a lot of friends that worked that case, who was brutally murdered. Anyway, you see this, and now it's repeating itself. We have three Westerners that are taken hostage, and they're under threat of execution imminently at any second. Well, tragically, 2 days later, well, I think 2 days after that, a video was released, and it showed the guys, and they were pleading for help. It was pretty hard to watch. But 2 days after that, a video is sent out, and it shows the execution, really, of Armstrong, Eugene Jack Armstrong. The military got reports that human remains had been found someplace, and they turned to us and said, "Hey, you guys are a forensics team from FBI. We want your help in visually identifying the remains." And, okay, no problem. Now, I say remains purposefully, because what these guys, I don't even want to repeat it, and I'm not going to describe it at all, but it was barbaric how they were killed. It was just absolutely barbaric, and it's not worth repeating in that way. But the remains were recovered by the military. They were brought to the base morgue. We were brought in, and the idea was, okay, let's try and make a visual identification, and then the official identification will be made when it's back in the U.S. And I distinctly remember being in this morgue with my colleagues from the FBI, and we're there with the military folks, and we have the remains in front of us. And I'm doing, one partial physical examination to confirm some things. But in the corner of the morgue was a TV, and it was scrolling. It had CNN on in the background with the sound off, but CNN was playing on the background. And I remember looking up, and I'm reading the ticker at the bottom, and it's saying, U.S. military has covered the remains of, and it said the other American. It didn't say Eugene Jack Armstrong. It actually got it wrong. It said Jack Hensley. And I just thought, holy surrealness. Like, we know who we have in front of us. The fact that they already know we have somebody is just shows you the speed of news and the media at the time. But it was horrific. And it was outrageous to think that, this poor guy met this fate. We're seeing it on the news real time, and here he is in front of me, and seeing the reports later of just this despondent, heartbroken, I think spouse. He had a spouse living overseas, and seeing the reports of the other families and how despondent they were. Fast forward 24 hours only, and sure enough, the same call comes in again. They held true to their word, and the military asked us to come assist again and visually confirm the remains. And this time it was Jack Hensley, tragically. And not concerned about what anybody was reporting at the time, but just trying actually not to see the news, which was tough because you're in a war zone. And I'm, part of your ability to keep sane is you want to keep connection with what else is going on outside this chaotic, frenetic, kinetic, active area. And you couldn't help but see news reports of the families, and Mr. Bigley's family in the UK was absolutely, it was heart-wrenching to watch for them, and they showed I remember seeing a picture of a smiling Jack Hensley. It looked like I believe he was in like a tuxedo for a wedding or something, and broadly smiling, and just again knowing that fate. So 24 hours later, of course, what are we expecting? Call number three. It didn't come. It was only, I think, a couple of weeks later that a foreign media outlet actually got a video showing his murder, his execution as well, and being confident that he was no longer with us. But it was just tough to see those photos of those families and these guys, and then to have at least two of them uh, in front of you after being barbarically killed. I mean, just in the worst way. I'll share with you too. These were fathers, they were husbands, they were brothers, they were friends and loved ones and everything. But years later, when news of the kinetic military operation that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was no longer with us, I actually went to mass. I'd like to say I'm pious Catholic. Well, I don't know what the priest would say about that, but I did go say a little prayer for the three of them, and hoping that some measure of justice was meted out with them, specifically for them, knowing the brutality in which their fates were met, by these barbarians.
Yeah, that is an incredible story. You went right into the heart of when we talk about evil in the world. You were right in the heart of that evil and those individuals like al-Zakari, an instrumental person in Al-Qaeda. And it is, it's eye-opening. I hate that these things happen, but I think it's important for purposes of today for a couple reasons to remind Americans that this is a sentiment or mentality throughout the world of what certain groups or individuals think about us as a whole. And that's not going to change. And number two, I think it's important to mention, to highlight the work and the assignments that individuals like you experienced. And I'm grateful that you're sharing this type of thing. And I'm also even more grateful, again, that people like you were out there to do these types of things. So you're not only in the United States doing this type of work, but you're traveling the world to try to address these threats. So I appreciate you and the things you did. And Americans need to just remember that this is a sentiment out there that isn't going to change.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something I talk about with my wife and even with my kids to this day. And that's the fact that evil exists, and you need to remember that. My wife, thankfully, I'm married to a mental health counselor. I mean, she's a mental health counselor by trade. She does other things now, so thankfully I have that supporting me. But I talk about all the time about how evil exists, and I look at the world through very dark glasses because of that. And I think about, I remember coming back from Iraq and getting into an argument with a dear friend of mine about whether we should be in Iraq or not and all this political stuff. And in the end, it's, the sacrifice of men and women in uniform in our armed services and the sacrifices that so many have made in Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts before and since is just something that we need to cherish, because if it were not for things like that, evil succeeds, evil triumphs. It doesn't just exist, and that's a scary thought. And as a dad, that's part of the reason why I went into this. I don't want to see evil exist, nor did you, nor do any
Right.
of us, right?
Right. Exactly. Great point. Great point. And, I'll echo your statement of being thankful to the American military as well to make the sacrifices that they've made to also protect us. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Is there anything else about this scenario or investigation that we should cover?
No, I think I probably screwed up in even saying that terrorist's name. I don't like to say the
I had
names of
trouble
these
saying
terrorists
that.
and these
Yeah.
bad guys. I really hate it because I want their names to be erased, and you want names of these victims to live on and forever and be cherished, and we erase these bad names from the history books. So I probably screwed up there,
No.
admittedly, and I apologize for that. But yeah, just I mean, another tragic ending for three guys that didn't deserve it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's keep walking along the path here and talk about our next investigation. Who should we discuss now at this point?
Yeah, and again, I'm not. None of these are uplifting stories, sadly.
Right, right. Well,
But
I think it's important to mention these, Kieran, because life isn't always what's the saying? Life isn't always rainbows and unicorns and Skittles and ice cream. There's a sad reality out there that there's evil in the U.S. There's evil in the world. And I think it's a
yeah,
stark reminder to individuals to be aware of that. So I think this is a very important episode today.
well, I appreciate that. So let me jump right into the next name, and this will be the name I highlight, and that's a guy by the name of John Granville. And I'll set the stage this way. So in December of 2007, I had just gotten promoted and assigned to be a legal attaché, or we call it in the FBI a legat, in Cairo, Egypt. This was a big deal. It was a big promotion for me. I'd come out of an assignment from a headquarters. Was super excited. It covered, some real garden spots: Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. Um, I have good recommendations for Egypt, but not so much for Sudan or Libya.
I
But
imagine.
anyway, uh, I got there early too. I went ahead before my wife and family came out. One, to get acclimated, so I knew what was what. This was going to be such truly a foreign environment for us. It was my first full-time overseas assignment. It also had required me to learn Arabic, which was tough.
Mm,
As I shared, I already spoke Spanish, so I thought I that would make it a little easier, but Arabic was just a whole nother beast to conquer for a language. It's a tonal language, it's right to left versus left to right in reading and writing. It was really tough. But anyway, I went out there early to get acclimated so that when my wife and my newborn son, literally 3 months old, show up, like I actually know what's what, and she doesn't look at me and say, "Hey, where's this?" or "What do I do with this?" And I look at her like I have no idea.
right.
Um, so I went out early. I spent Christmas alone, and I mean, I was invited to some people's house very kindly, and I'm serving as this legal attaché. And I'll take a quick detour. This term legal attaché or legat is really a weird diplomatic term. It actually dates back to World War II. So before there was a CIA, the first true undercover operatives, there was OSS in existence, yes, but the first undercover operatives that were sent into embassies were actually FBI agents. And because most FBI agents were lawyers, or a lot of FBI agents were lawyers at the time, they were given the diplomatic cover title of legal attaché. And that stuck with us. And to this day, it's still the title we use. And then we use it as legat, as I mentioned.
Hmm.
So Cairo was an exciting assignment. It was going to be tough, though. I knew going into it. I was told by the senior levels, in fact, to get the job, I interview with then Director Mueller and Deputy Director Pistol at the same time. Probably the hardest interview I've ever had in my life, where they just rapid fire questioned at me of what this and what that and what do you think about this and are you ready and everything. But I get there and I'm there through Christmas. I'm there through New Year's. And because I'm by myself, I'm like, yeah, I'll just go in on New Year's and, work and get used to the paperwork and get used to what's going on and everything. So I'm in there and I get a call from my colleague on my team. And he's like, hey, my wife, and by the way, he's a native Arab speaker, as is his wife. He's like, hey, my wife just saw some news report about some attack that happened in Sudan. I'm coming in. I'm like, okay, come on in. And we get in there. And by that time, there was more news. And sure enough, there had been some kind of attack against embassy personnel in Khartoum, Sudan. And Khartoum, Sudan was to the south of us. I hadn't been there yet at all. But no sooner than we learn this news and we get a panicked call from the embassy in Khartoum calling our office saying, "Hey, this is what happened." And what happened was there had been a New Year's Eve party for some members of the U.S. Embassy, for some diplomats. And after the party ended in the wee early hours of the morning on January the 1st, John Granville hops in his car with his local driver, and they proceed to go, and another car pulls up next to him and just shoots them all up and kills both of them. Now, I didn't know anybody in the embassy yet, and I didn't know who John was, but I came to learn, John was this saint of a person. He had been in the Peace Corps before his assignment. While he was there at Khartoum, he was part of the USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. We've come to learn a lot about USAID recently, I think, probably for the wrong reasons. But I will tell you, people that were working in USAID, certainly John in this sense, I mean, they're doing the Lord's work. They were doing things just to help the people of Sudan without any expectation of anything in return. He was a guy that had graduated from, I believe, Fordham and Clark, and I only remember Clark because I know I had applied to Clark when I was looking at schools. He was only 2 years younger than I was, and I believe he was from Buffalo, New York, as I recall. Anyway, we get this call from the embassy operator or embassy switchboard in Sudan. So then I pick up the phone and call what's known as the regional security officer for the embassy in Khartoum, or RSO. RSOs are the senior diplomatic security service special agents, generally in charge of the people and the personnel and security of U.S. embassy personnel and facilities for any given embassy around the world. They have a litany of other duties. Oftentimes, they are the sole American law enforcement representative in some of these more austere locations around the world at U.S. embassies. Great agency. They do a lot of different things. But I got the RSO on the phone and we're chatting, and I could hear the heaviness in his voice. And I could tell he was still processing what had just happened and what he still needed to do. And I simply told him, "Brother, we're on our way." So my colleague and I scrambled to go get Sudanese visas, which I learned were not easy to get normally. In fact, he had been to Sudan before, I had not, and he said it took a while, but we made some calls. We got some, I think we got the ambassador involved from our embassy to call their ambassador. And again, not necessarily a great relationship either at the time between the U.S. and Sudan. Fairly tenuous, because at the time, Sudan was still listed as a state sponsor of terrorism on the U.S. government list. So not a great relationship. Nevertheless, we got our visas. We're on a plane that night. And I remember landing in Sudan, and we go to the hotel, and it's the early morning hours. The sun really isn't up yet. And we're going to go just drop our stuff there, shower up, and then go to the embassy to start meeting with people. And we walk into this fairly nice hotel. I believe it was called the Rotana Hotel at the time. I think it's called something else now. It's right next to the embassy or right next to the airport in Khartoum. And because it was still the Christmas season, oddly enough, the lobby is adorned with a Christmas tree, and they're playing Christmas music over the loudspeakers. But this is this is a Muslim country. It's a conservative Muslim country. There's no mistake about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we walk, and there's a Christmas tree, and Christmas music is playing. And I hear, like, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, and I'm shaking my head going, where in the world am I right now? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Anyway, we go to the embassy that next morning, a couple hours later, meet with the country team, meet with the charge d'affaires, which is the acting ambassador. The mood was grim, to say the least. It wasn't just that they lost a colleague and that this happened, this horrible thing happened. It was that they lost this colleague, this guy. Like, he was beloved. It was clear.
It sounds like it.
They were torn apart, that it was this guy especially. As things got going, We decided it was going to be a team of FBI alongside our colleagues from Diplomatic Security Service. Uh, and we did some pretty innovative things that obviously I won't talk about or anything. But it started kind of surreal, another surreal moment. And it was almost out of something out of a TV show. So the embassy's like, so what do you want to do? I'm like, well, we need to talk to the Sudanese cops. They've got control of everything. They know where the crime scene is. They have our car. I know they had gotten the body back of Mr. Granville. But we need to get in front of them. And so they called over there, and there's some hemming and hawing and equivocating. And I'm like, look, let's just get in the car and go. Let's just go. And they're like, and in Arab countries, it was very common. You get called Mr. Kieran, Mr. your first name. They're like, are you sure, Mr. Kieran? I'm like, Aywa in Arabic. Let's go. So we get in the car, we convoy over there, and this is where it becomes out of a TV show, almost comical. I step out of the car, and the big gate, there are two armed guards standing there, and I do right out of the movies, show my credentials, and in my best Arabic that I could muster at the time, was basically, my name is Kieran Ramsey. I'm here from the FBI. I need to see your commanding general immediately about this terrorist attack. And I'll never forget this Sudanese police guard, like his jaw just drops open. He's like he's probably never met an American, let alone never met an American typecast as an FBI agent, because I'm wearing a dark suit, white shirt, conservative tie. And I just showed him my FBI creds. He's like, and I tried to say something to him in Arabic. So this guy's blown away.
You just
and
blew
I had
his mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I had my colleague with me, Amar, and I'll never forget Amar turning to me. And Amar was a native Arabic speaker, and he was a fantastic agent investigator. He's since retired as well. But he looks at me and he says under his breath, he's like, oh, not so bad for a white guy in an Arab country. And we kind of chuckled.
Yeah,
so we kind of launched it from there, right? Off to the races. We did get in front of the commanding general. Had a lot of discussion about what we should do, and I kept emphasizing, we need to do this together. We both lost countrymen. That was my line. Like, we both lost countrymen. These terrorists deserve to be caught because they killed a Sudanese citizen, they killed an American citizen. We need to do this together. And I had a team from New York join me as well. So it's typical in the FBI when we have a major terrorist incident or some major events, we have extraterritorial offices in the U.S. that are responsible for these areas, and they'll actually own the investigation. So for Africa, it was New York at the time. So I had a group of agents and task force officers join us. And early on, I remember we went over there to have a meeting, and we hadn't made a lot of progress in terms of actual investigation per se at that point. But the general said, hey, we'd like you to have lunch with us. Basically, he was offering to break bread with us. I'm like, sure, let's go. So we sit down, and I'll never forget another interesting moment. They started offering plates of food and everything, and the New York guys were like, no, thank you, I'm good, no, thank you. And admittedly, it's because everybody, if you've not traveled to the region before recently, you're going to have some intestinal distress getting used to how things are. It's not to say anything's bad. It's just different. And but they're saying no to things. So I had to lean over to them. And again, I'm still new in this role, but I knew enough to tell them, look, guys, you're going to eat whatever frickin' is put in front of you, and you're going to smile about it. Otherwise, you're going to offend our new friends that we have right now. We need to break bread. So everybody got it. Everybody ate something as best they could. I made the joke, and I'm like, just double up on your Z-Pack. You're going to be fine. It won't kill you.
Right.
But that little act proved so beneficial, because at the end of that lunch, I remember the commanding general, this big guy, he was taller than I was, had a big, deep voice in Arabic. He says, okay, Mr. Kieran, what would you like to do next? And I said, well, we still haven't seen the crime scene, and we would like access to the vehicle that our victims were in so we can do some forensic examination of it, because I also had somebody from the lab with me to do some bullet trajectory. And he said, okay, let's go. And literally walked outside, a line of cars pulled up, our cars pulled up, and off we went. And it proved so fruitful that all of a sudden, no, now we're really working together. That continued, and I would tell you, in the scheme of things, fairly quickly, we had DS agents, FBI agents, FBI task force officers, a whole ton of people back in the States and at the embassy supporting the effort. But within a matter of really less than months, more than like weeks, we fully identified this group. They called themselves like Al Qaeda in the land of two Niles or something. I mean, they weren't really a true Al Qaeda affiliate, but they were certainly connected to other Al Qaeda figures, and they were certainly given that same international jihadi narrative, if you will. But we identified all of them, and we were able to enable the Sudanese police to arrest them and capture them.
Wow.
We tried to make sure we stayed with that commitment to them too. So we attended the trial. They had a death penalty trial, certainly not like an American federal criminal proceeding, but they had their own trial that was conducted with rules and a judge and everything. So we got to sit through that and watched as they all got convicted, which was great. And they were all given the death penalty. But of course, sadly, not too long after they all escaped the Sudanese prison they were in, I believe they killed a police officer, if memory serves correct. One was quickly recaptured. Another, I think, was killed in some other terrorist attack. I'm not sure what happened to the other two. But, and I'll circle this off in this way. Here we have John Granville. And again, I'll go back to an image. The image that was being disseminated after this incident was a picture of him and his mom sitting together, smiling very happily in better times. And I'll never forget that picture contrasted with the car that he had been riding in and how many bullet holes and shattered glass and the bloodstains in that car and, the horrific end that he met. And knowing that even though we were able to identify, arrest, and capture them, was full justice afforded to John Granville? I can't necessarily answer that. I don't think so. And I'm not in touch with his family or anything, but it's one of those things again that still sticks with me.
Yeah, those are images in this scenario and all the others that you spoke about, and you're going to continue to speak about. These are images you just cannot unsee. No matter what you do or try or think, they're not going to go away. Again, another example of just evil around the world. And I'm not going to dwell on that. But these are understandably so difficult. Putting myself in your shoes, these are difficult things to see and have to think about, throughout your life and even after retirement.
Without a doubt. And again, not that I knew John Granville before, not that I'm friends with his family or in touch with any of his friends. I do know a lot of USAID people that knew him, and I came to meet people in USAID after that. But again, here's somebody that's just doing the Lord's work, trying to make things better for people that he doesn't know and he doesn't expect anything in return. And he meets this horrible fate, and I don't know that justice was fully served for his benefit. And yet, and it's not just me. I know the whole team that worked on that is left with those images of him smiling with his mom in one sense, and that mangled car, that shot up car in another.
Right. And one way to look at it is you and your team did everything within your power to address that and to get to the bottom of it. So that's a positive takeaway from a scenario like this. So this episode of the Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Law Enforcement Consulting, your go-to resource for expert law enforcement training. Whether it's conducting successful criminal investigations, performing undercover work, mastering interviews, conducting surveillance, utilizing confidential informants, or case strategy, Streetwise 360 gives officers the real-world skills they need for success. Learn more at streetwise-360.com because knowledge is power in the field. Now back to the show. So Where should we go from here? What should we talk about next?
So let's jump to a story in New Hampshire. And again, yet again, no less another tragic story. In 2011, I was assigned as what's called the Senior Supervisory Resident Agent for the FBI offices in New Hampshire. We call it the SSRA in the FBI. In other agencies' parlance, it's called the RAC, right? The Resident
Okay, yeah,
Agent in Charge.
sure.
Same thing. We just use a different term. And New Hampshire is a fairly small shop. There are two offices at the time. One was in Bedford, one was in Portsmouth. Um, all told, maybe about 30 people on the team between agents, task force officers, analysts, professional staff. But it was a great assignment, and it was a great assignment because we went from that Egypt assignment to New Hampshire. So super pumped and thrilled, and had a phenomenal experience in the Middle East. We really grew to love everything about it, even though it was challenging at times. But when I got the offer to go to New Hampshire, I had to take it because my wife is originally from New Hampshire. And, we had a young son at the time, and then, oh yeah, she's pregnant with our second. And
Yeah.
and we had the option to extend. We had the option to go someplace else, and this came up, and she's like, "No, uh, let's go to New Hampshire. Let's go quote unquote home, and we'll have our second child, and let's do it that way." So I jumped at the chance. Great assignment, great people in the office across both offices. I had some phenomenal agents, investigators, just some legendary people. In fact, I had one agent in one of the smaller offices who had caught two FBI top 10 fugitives. Now, it used
Wow.
to be legendary. You would be legendary to just catch one top 10 fugitive. This woman caught two. So she was just a rock star, and so many other great people. And New Hampshire was also great because it was a small state, and we had really good relationships with the law enforcement community there, the FBI as a whole. And I used to joke anyway. I said, as I got there, for anybody that doesn't like us, I just got the Sudanese to like me, and they're state sponsors of terrorism. I'm sure I can get, whatever New Hampshire police chief to like us too.
There you go.
We'll figure it out.
Right.
And one thing that's unique about New Hampshire, because it's a small state, any major crimes cases like a kidnapping or a homicide is usually controlled by the New Hampshire State Attorney General's office with or in partnership with New Hampshire State Police's major crimes unit. And we had decent relationships with both of those organizations as I got there. So it was a great transition. Thrilled to be in this assignment, but as with everything, it got challenging fairly quickly. And this incident, in fact, involves a little girl, another little girl by the name of Selena Cass. Selena was 11 years old. She was living in West Stewartstown, New Hampshire. And on July 11th of 2011, we get a call from New Hampshire State Police. Hey, there's been a possible kidnapping in West Stewartstown. Can you guys come up and help out? I said, sure. Now, I was a little, humbled in a way because I had traveled all over New Hampshire before, having dated my wife and having gone all over New Hampshire. I knew where everything was in New Hampshire, so I had to kind of sheepishly ask one of the guys. I'm like, "Where's West Stewartstown? I have no idea where that is."
Mhm.
And he's like, "Boss, it is all the way up north, where the borders of New Hampshire, Vermont, and Canada meet."
Oh,
And
wow.
it's a nothing place town. There's nothing going on there.
Hmm.
I said, okay, let's go. So a bunch of us hopped in cars. We convoyed up there, lights and sirens the whole way. Normally it takes 3 hours to get up there. Of course, being cops, lights and sirens, we made it up sooner. And as we got there right away, I met up with the lieutenant over the New Hampshire State Police Major Crimes Unit. He was a pretty well-known figure. He's since passed away, sadly. Lieutenant Jim Garrity. Um, uh, really respected though, and I got briefed up with him, and was immediately able to kind of partner my agents, my team with their team, and start to really get things going. Thankfully too, I had an agent on my team, John Ennis, who had been a New Hampshire State Trooper. He knew everybody in New Hampshire State Police, so he made introductions all the more easy. And we just kind of jumped right in it. It was, okay, let's set up or tell us what the situation is, why we think this, X, Y, and Z, with the local police chief and their small department, the New Hampshire State Police, the county sheriff up there. Again, a missing kid, a missing, young girl. People hit the button and people respond, and it's a neat thing to see, even though it's a tragic thing for why it happens.
Right.
So while up there, I run into, or I obviously engage with the colonel of the state police, another phenomenal guy, cop's cop, great leader. He's still, to this day, I think he's now the commissioner of public safety for New Hampshire, a guy by the name of Bobby Quinn. And he's super thankful that we're there, and let's do this together. So the story we get basically is that Selena, again, 11-year-old girl, is living in a multifamily with her mom, her mom's boyfriend, her sister, and another adult male who is the son of a former boyfriend of mom. So unusual family dynamic. And the mom is absolutely inconsolable. I mean, she is just wailing with grief and fear and uncertainty. And again, being a parent now, and I was a parent at the time, totally understandable. But it was even hard for her to communicate. She was so grief-stricken and worried and everything. So we started down that usual path of steps we take for a missing kid, for a potential kidnapping case. We set up a command post in the local elementary school because it was summer break. No one was in there. Let's use that. Because of the suspicious nature of her disappearance, which the story was, yeah, she went to bed that night. She was here. She may have moved to the couch, and then we woke up and she was gone. Like, okay. And she had no habit of wandering off, no issues of running away. She was known as a very gentle, kind, friendly, lovable little girl, not a problem child whatsoever. So it just, there were some red flags that started popping up all over the place as to, okay,
Right.
what really happened to this
Something's up,
little
yeah.
girl? Yeah. And, what was interesting, this was a tiny town. I think the population was certainly less than 1,000. It may have been, between, maybe 500, maybe a little more. But as we moved around town, no matter what time of day or night, it seemed everybody was outside. And either they were congregating around the house to try and give the family support, or they were out looking, because when we do these searches, they'll organize volunteer groups, and New Hampshire Fish and Game in the state of New Hampshire usually leads any search effort on the ground. So they came out in force. So it was just everybody was out there. And for me, one of the things that was unique about this was my real first experience with the national news media and even the international news media, because this thing became an overnight news story like that. Part of it was because early on, our team fought to get a $25,000 reward posted right away. Like, there's no reason why we can't. Our boss had up to that authority. I fought for that, to say, hey, let's go out with this hard. This will make the profile immediately raised. And this is a nothing town. This is a tiny town. $25,000 is a life-altering amount of money for this place.
Right.
Maybe that'll get us something there. But not realizing that was also going to escalate this media attention. And there isn't a big media market in New Hampshire. It's really a subset of the Boston media market. And they showed up in full force, but everybody did. Like, all these national news shows showed up and everything. And it was there too that in this context, I met the assistant attorney general at the time, a woman by the name of Jane Young, who became my partner through the tenure of my entire time in New Hampshire for a lot of big cases. And she was super sharp, no nonsense, super experienced. And I remember kind of second or third day coming in early that morning, and I pull up. I see her in the parking lot, and she just kind of nonchalantly says to me, "Hey, you ready to go on Good Morning America this morning?" And I'm like, "What? What?" Like, okay. So, I got dropped in the deep end of the pool with becoming the face of the FBI for this investigation. And thank goodness I had a good friend. He was the public affairs officer down in the Boston office. A buddy of mine, Greg, and he gave me some great advice. He said, "Look, just be yourself. Remember, you are representing the FBI, but don't talk FBI speak. Talk plainly. Make sure that you realize, you're there and that you are there to get the public's help, and that we all need to work to find this missing little girl." And it was great advice, and it stuck with me through the whole time. Well, of course, yet another image. Early on in the investigation, the mom gives us a photo, and it's this school photo of Selena. She's in her school basketball uniform. It's a purple uniform, and it's got the school name and her number. And she's got this big smile on her face. And one of the unique things about Selena, she had this prominent protruding front tooth when she smiled. So she was easily recognizable, but like just such an innocent picture of a kid in elementary school in their basketball uniform, right? And that
Right.
was the photo that we used mostly as we kind of dealt with the media situation on this, and we gave really national press conferences almost every day for the better part of a week in this. Well, as I said, there were red flags popping up in this investigation all over the place, and we had a great core investigative team of my most experienced agents with some of their great major crimes unit detectives from the state police. And immediately those two adult males and the residents become focal points of the investigation for obvious reasons, right? I mean, and I won't go into any of the necessary things that pointed to that, but at the same time, this stepfather starts just doing some wacky stuff, exhibiting wacky behavior with the national news media watching him, knowing that the national news media is watching him. And all of us are thinking he's setting himself up for, one of these, not guilty by reason of mental defect defenses, possibly.
Right.
Didn't know it for sure at the time, but it was just off. So we had also brought up our FBI Child Abduction Response Team, or CARD team. This is the team that the FBI usually brings in for any kidnapping of a juvenile or anything like that. And they're usually a group of very experienced agents, analysts. They have specialized training. It includes people from our renowned behavioral sciences unit, the profilers. And we had brought them in to work with everybody. And at some point, there was a decision made by that whole team that myself, being the senior FBI person, and I had brought up another buddy of mine who was another supervisor in the FBI, a dear friend of mine who's also since retired, Scott. And he was helping me lead, kind of the operations portion. And at some point, the team looked at us and said, "Hey, we want you guys to take a run at the stepfather." I said, "Okay." And they came out with, we think he's intimidated by the FBI. We think if we can put some pressure on him, maybe we'll see him make some other indications. Maybe, who knows, maybe he'll make some kind of admission, or maybe we'll get some other insight that we didn't have. And the plan would be, okay, we're going to ask him if he can take us around town and show us where he thinks we should look, that perhaps we haven't looked in every place, and maybe he can help us think of places that she might go, or that she might hang out at, or that places that only somebody from here would know, that he could point out, we should look here, we should look there.
Good
And
approach.
yeah, and my buddy and I were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So we approached the stepfather at the house, and he freely agrees to come with us. We told him, "Look, you're not in any trouble or anything. This is totally your free will. You can tell us no at any time. We just want your help to see where else we can look, because we've got literally hundreds of people. I think we doubled the size of the population of the city, or nearly doubled it, just with presence of law enforcement. We actually had to bring in a cell phone tower. We asked the local cell phone company. We said, "Hey, our phones aren't working and we're using radios. Is there any way you can bring one up?" They agreed, which the town loved, because all of a sudden their cell phone service improved exponentially while this was going on. And we got criticism after the case because they took the cell phone tower away and everybody's cell phone service went down. But I digress. So we get the stepfather in the car, and I can't remember if Scott was driving or I was, but we're driving around asking him, okay, where else? And oddly enough, he took us in this circuitous route eventually, and it was around this little area where the town had a local river that ran through it, and at a certain point it was dammed. And you could drive around it. There was a road on one side. You go behind the block, down the block, and then you would come across another bridge, and then you would drive along the river on the other side. And he literally told us, well, take a left here, or take a right here, take a right. I mean, literally drove around it. And both of us picked up on it while we're driving around this thing. His body language, his behavior has just amped up. Like he's twitching, he's fidgeting. Like there was, we had already had a baseline of his body language, his nonverbals going out there. And all of a sudden he's just acting weird, and he drives us around in this circle. Now, I'll tell you, there was already a discussion about trying to dive on this area, get divers up here. Maybe we should look in that. After that drive, it was agreed, yeah, we need divers. We need to jump in there and start looking. And sure enough, the next day, they did. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, our worst fears came true. After the first couple of dives, they came up and they said they found something. It looked like it could be a body. It was all wrapped up. And they brought it up, and sure enough, it was Selena. She was wrapped in blankets and bed sheets with a rope, and there was a sandbag in the package to kind of weigh it down. And I remember they had brought her up on the side of the dam there, and Jane and I were there, and some of the other folks, and they slowly unwrapped this bundle, and sure enough, you could see Selena's face, and you could see that protruding front tooth, and you knew it was her. And it was really, as you can imagine, it was heartbreaking, but it immediately shifted the case into a homicide investigation, which is strictly under the purview for New Hampshire Attorney General's office and New Hampshire State Police, which we agreed, look, we're in this, we're in it for a penny, we're in it for a pound at this point to make sure that we're supporting them. So we stayed with it, but it continued on long after. Unfortunately, at first, I believe the stepfather was committed to a mental hospital. And then like 5 years later, they attempted to bring charges on him. But because of his mental state, they had to withdraw the charges. And I don't believe he's been held to account, even despite some very diligent, very thorough investigation, by everybody that was involved in this. And again, I go back to these images, and that image of Selena in the purple basketball uniform smiling, and that image of her lifeless face being kind of unveiled in that bundle of bedding after she was brought up.
That's again, I'm speechless. The evil that's out there, and as a parent, like you said, I'm a parent as well. That's just unimaginable, and it's unfortunate, one, that this stuff happens, and two, that folks have to deal with it. And I think, again, I'm going to echo what we both said earlier. It's important. This isn't enough uplifting episode, but it's important to highlight these types of situations, to let the public know what law enforcement deals with. And, this isn't just something that your shift is over, you go home, you flip the switch, you forget about it, you go back into work the next day, you flip the switch back on, and you're back to it. Like, this is stuff, as you well know, that stays with you from the time it happens until the day you pass from this earth.
Yeah, you're right. And, again, I my hat's off to New Hampshire State Major Crimes Unit and the New Hampshire Attorney General's team and all the agents and Fish and Game and volunteers that went out there frantically looking for this girl for about a week's time. I'll share two other vignettes about this. One, I got a little made fun of by our colleagues from the New Hampshire State Police after we take the father-in-law around, and he's just acting weird. My partner and I decide, okay, let's try and really press him and see if we can get him to crack, because he seems like he's just on the verge, like he's right there. Both of us have done enough interviews and interrogations that maybe we can push him over the edge. So I started raising my voice and getting closer to him and louder and louder. And again, this was being monitored in the background by our state police colleagues. So afterwards, they're like, "Did you go full Sipowicz on him?" And I had to sit there and think for a second. And probably a lot of your audience might not know the cultural reference, although if they're of our generation, they will. But
Absolutely.
Andy Sipowicz of NYPD Blue, they're like, "You tried to go Sipowicz on him, didn't you? What do you think you are? Like, where do you think you are with this?" And I just laughed it off. It was interesting. And another vignette. So I heard another podcast. It's I don't know if you want me to say the name or not, but
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I think it's called True Crime New England, and I listened to it not too long ago. And they have an episode specifically about the murder of Selena Cass. And they really share in the outrage, which was nice to hear, of the fact that no one has been held account for Selena's murder. Um, but they get a lot of things wrong in it, in terms of how her body was discovered. They make some claim that, her body was found floating by a passerby, and we left the body in the water for hours. That's just not true. I was there. And then some of the other claims. But what I loved about it was, just that sense of outrage of, again, an 11-year-old girl, who's innocent, who's, just, has nothing to do with anything in terms of bad in this world, and yet is befallen by this evil act, this barbaric act,
Yeah.
and again, unfortunately, we're still left with, have we had any justice for Selena to this day?
Right. And that's something that I was going to circle back on, was that is infuriating. That, I just wanted to have you clarify that no one's been held accountable, like you said. Um, Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Despite best efforts, and again, it's not for lack of trying and really good hard work, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it is what it is.
Right. And again, just like all your scenarios and cases that you're discussing here, I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize all of your law enforcement partnering agencies and individuals, because not only are you going through this, but so are they, so it's a far-reaching effect that these types of cases have on law enforcement as a whole. So, and I just thought of this. I've had a couple guests, Tony being one of them, that echoed the sentiment that if you find yourself, and I'm sure we'll discuss this, prior to conclusion, but if you find yourself, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're, not law enforcement, if you feel that there is a need for some sort of assistance to address whatever issues you're going through, there's nothing wrong with that. And that should certainly be done. So I just wanted to interject that here as we continue on and talk about these types of investigations and scenarios.
No, it's a good point, and I'll circle back to, both my time at Ground Zero after 9/11, and even Iraq. And look, there were thousands upon thousands of first responders that were heroic in the aftermath of 9/11 in New York and Washington and the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And tragically, we all know how, so many died on the day, especially in New York, but then have since died. Even more have since died of first responders from illnesses contracted from 9/11. But that to say, seeing those things in evil, it took me a little to realize I did have some PTSD, especially it was really after coming out of Iraq. And again, thankfully, I am married to somebody who is a mental health counselor by trade, who recognized it and said, "Hey, buddy, big guy, time to do something about this."
Yeah.
And I did, and we could talk a whole nother 3 hours about that process, but it's something that stuck with me as a leader in the FBI, to embrace anybody that was having a difficult time, to really get any resources you could, but gently encourage them, so that you're not further stigmatizing them in some way, to get that necessary support.
Right. Well said. I think we're going to keep stepping forward here in our discussions, and I think our next individual, is it Martin Richards that you want to
Yeah.
discuss? I think and I'm going to let you walk us through it, but again, another senseless, tragic ending here. So please share with us.
Yeah. The name again, Martin Richards, 8-year-old boy killed in the Boston Marathon bombing. Very well known for anybody that knew of the Boston Marathon bombing. But let me set the stage this way. As I mentioned earlier, I consider myself originally from New York and Boston. Uh, I grew up every summer. I spent the entire time in Medford, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, or on Cape Cod, where my family had a home. Uh, and spent summers going into Boston. Was regularly visiting up there with my grandmother and stuff. So Boston was always home to me. And then, sure enough, I went to Northeastern, if you can hear my accent, Northeastern in Boston, and loved it. Great town to go to school in. But the Boston Marathon in the backdrop is something that I'd always grown up watching. I had gone to it a couple of times as a kid to see it. And then when I was in college, I worked in the bars along Boylston Street, which is where the finish line comes to an end. And loved working on what's called Marathon Monday, because it's a great festive party atmosphere. In a bar, you're going to make great money, but you're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to be able to see everybody cheering. You're going to see the marathoners running by. And it was just always a great family-friendly event. It really was. But, the morning of April 15th, 2023, it's no different that morning, at least. In fact, I was in my office. I was still assigned to New Hampshire at the time. I was in my office in New Hampshire. I had the marathon live on TV, which would not be surprising at all, just seeing what was going on. I had already seen the winners had already crossed the finish line, a couple hours before. And then all of a sudden, it's about 2:45, or I think exactly 2:49 p.m. And I have it on the background, and I hear some newscaster go, "Whoa." And I turn around and something's happened, but then just past the camera shot, you can see an explosion. So it's like two explosions just happened. I'm like, oh boy. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be a bad week. So sure enough, what had happened, 2:49 p.m., a bomb detonates in front of Marathon Sports, which is literally steps away from the finish line. There at the end on Boylston. And then 200 yards up the street, 12 seconds later, a second bomb detonates in front of what was then the Forum restaurants. And all hell breaks loose. You've had two bombs happen, coordinated clearly within a matter of seconds. So I ran out into the bullpen area and I said, "Hey, everybody, let's get together real quick." Some were starting to hear about it, some didn't know. I said, "Look, here's what I just watched on TV." I already had somebody trying to call our ops center to find out what was going on, but they didn't know because the dust was still in the air. So I said, "Okay, anybody that's on a specialty team like SWAT, a bomb tech, crisis negotiator, crisis management, evidence response, in your cars on your way right now, start heading south, get to Boston. Everybody else, I want you to go home, pack a bag, expect to start tonight because they're going to have to sort through the dust and get everything going. But we're going to be part of that relief effort that steps in, and we'll start doing the overnights just automatically." And I eventually got in touch with some colleagues and some of the bosses, and they said, "That's a great idea. Yeah, please hold back some people so that we can have some relief in the middle of the night tonight." So that's what we do. I headed down that night, and as I got there, again, there were just countless first responders: Boston Police, Massachusetts State Police, MBTA Police, Boston Police, Boston Fire, Boston EMS, ATF, FBI, every federal agency is running down there. Surrounding cities and towns are sending their folks to just try and bring order to chaos, right? That's what these scenes are like. It's
Right.
You're trying to bring order to chaos and not only stop any further threat to life and safety, but then, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to proceed to figure out what happened and if anybody's responsible? So as I got to the office, the command post was being stood up. It was almost there, but still had some things to do. As I recall, you know, um, it was good, and it was a solid thing that really held us together. That even though in Boston in those days we still lived under the dark cloud of the Whitey Bulger episode or the Whitey Bulger
Oh
era,
yeah.
which was a huge dark cloud for Boston FBI that I remember even as a young customs agent, let alone when I switched to the FBI. Anytime I would visit Boston, on the front page of the Boston Globe or Boston Herald was corrupt FBI Boston Whitey Bulger. Like that was the constant headline. And it was an awful thing. And it did have really negative impacts, far-reaching negative impacts, and rightly so. But it was because of a couple of very corrupt FBI employees that carried with it. Nevertheless, though, everybody still knew each other. Like the senior ranks of all these agencies still knew each other on a first name basis. You know, Paul and Jimmy and Bobby and Ed and everybody knew each other on a first name basis, and that was clear. And even though I was coming down from New Hampshire, I knew some of these folks, and thankfully, again, I went to Northeastern, and the Northeastern Mafia is a thing. And I was able to, there were a lot of people I knew from either through that connection or other connections, having grown up in the area, which made it a little easier. Now, I'll tell you in this regard, there's the period of when the bombs go off to when these two brothers are captured, and this time I'm not going to say their names. But from the time the bombs go off to the time the older brother is dead and the younger brother is captured is about 108 hours. And if you ask anybody that was involved in that, any of the first responders from any agency, BPD, Mass State Police, Cambridge, Watertown, whatever, it was probably the longest 108-hour day of their careers, no doubt.
I
right?
can imagine. Yep.
And there are so many stories to be told in that, of so many different people doing so many heroic things. And the story has been told a lot. There's at least a half a dozen documentaries. Netflix most recently came out with the most recent documentary. And some of my retired colleagues, who were already retired colleagues that were involved, were in that. I was fortunate enough to be in the HBO documentary and the ABC News documentary. And then there was a Nat Geo documentary. And then there were some movies. There's the Patriots Day movie with Mark Wahlberg.
Right.
And then there's another movie about a specific survivor and his personal journey. He was a double amputee. But anyway, the story's been told 100 times of that 108-hour crisis period. And I've talked about it a lot. I've done a lot of public speaking for it. But the long and short of it is really this. 4 people were killed during that 108 hours due to the actions of these dirtbag terrorists, right? We had 3 people killed at the finish line, and we had a police officer who was assassinated by them in an effort to get his firearm, Officer Sean Collier of the MIT Police Department. But the 3 that were killed at the finish line, first you had Crystal Campbell. She was 29 years old. She was from Medford, Mass. There with her friends just to enjoy the marathon, right? Then you had Lingzi Liu. She was 23. She was an exchange student from China, an only child. Wasn't supposed to be at the marathon, but her friend, her grad student friend, was like, "Hey, come on, let's go down," and twisted her arm and got her to go. And then last but not least, certainly, and the focus of this little story is 8-year-old Martin Richards. And Martin is down there with his entire family, his dad, Bill, his mom, Denise, his sister, Janie, his brother, Henry. And they are right there at that Forum restaurant, the location of the second blast. And sadly, again, we have video and photos showing that the first bomb goes off and Bill, the father, does the right thing. He sees it and he's like, "Ooh, something's wrong. Let's start moving." And he goes to hop over the barrier to grab the kids and get them out of there. And the second device goes off. Those 3 that were killed at the scene, thankfully, were the only people to perish, which is surprising because over 250 people sustained some serious injuries. There were 16 amputees. And just thank goodness for the immense amount of medical personnel present and the quick response by all those first responders, because the fact that only 3 people were killed is just amazing. I mean, it blows your mind that only 3 people died no matter how tragic and awful that is. But it was just a scene of utter devastation. It really was.
Devastation and chaos, I would assume.
Exactly. So Martin's there with his family, and again, I'll tell you, I'm not in touch with the family, and they probably wouldn't remember me from Adam. But he's there. He's cheered on the runners, and this horrible thing happens. The entire family is blown apart. They all sustain injuries. But where this comes into that image again is shortly after the victims were identified in the press, a photo comes out of little Martin holding up this sign, 8-year-old boy holding up a sign that says, "No more hurting people, peace." Like the sheer irony of this boy holding that sign, being victimized by these horrible, uh, I wouldn't even call them human beings, things, was just ridiculous. Now, as I mentioned, a huge team effort. I ended up not ever going back to my assignment in New Hampshire. I ended up getting essentially a battlefield promotion, became the assistant special agent in charge for the counterterrorism branch, and oversaw that. We called it the Boss Bomb Task Force, with just some phenomenal people. I had 2 great supervisors, Dave Donahue and Court Ray, and a whole bunch of other great case agents, and just a phenomenal interagency team from so many different agencies. I would never be able to mention all of them. And again, we eventually able to confidently state it was these 2 brothers, the ones deceased. There were some other people charged, but not charged with any conspiracy to do the bombing, but they recognized the brothers after the fact and didn't say anything to the police, and then tried to dispose of some things they found. But I then sat through the federal death penalty trial of the younger brother. And I tried to make it most days as much as I could, but it went for a good bit. And I know that when I was in there, I would always try and sit next to some family, just so that if there was some question, some issue, like, being one of the senior leaders of the Boston FBI, I could try and answer it or get them whatever help they needed. And I remember sitting next to the Martin family quite regularly. And again, not that they would know who I am or remember me, but I know that I was sitting next to them too the day that Bill Richards, Martin's dad, testified as to what happened that day, and his description of what he witnessed, what he went through, some of the choices he had to make, which I won't talk about out of respect to him. When he was testifying, the courtroom was so still and silent, hanging on his every word, and it was like the oxygen had left the room, and the only person that was allowed to have any was him to explain what happened. And I just remember sitting next to this family going, I don't know how his wife is handling this. I don't know how he's up there talking about it. And they took a break after he was done. And, one of the things that stuck with me too was, at the time, my sons were 6 and 3. So not that much younger than little Martin. But he got a break. And I recall a lot of people went to the bathroom, and I kind of stood in line, and I got in there and dry heaved twice because I was so moved by it and so shaken by it. Look, long story short, Bomber gets convicted. It switches into the death penalty phase of a federal trial, which is unique. It's not the same thing as every other federal criminal trial. There's essentially another jury trial in effect as to whether the death penalty will be imposed. And there were a lot of feelings about the death penalty, a lot of public feeling, a lot of public discourse. Every victim had their own opinion. The Martins, they did a very well-known op-ed on the front page of the Boston Globe coming out against it. And I would get asked a lot too, like, what do I think? Well, death penalty or no? And I'll tell you, look, generally speaking, I'm pro death penalty in certain circumstances. But I had to keep answering, saying, look, it's not for me to comment on. This is it's the victims that should have any say. If anybody's going to make a say, it's them. We don't get to choose, and especially as an FBI agent, and as federal law enforcement, it's not up to us. No matter what we think personally, it's the court that's going to decide that, and we've got to keep our opinions to ourselves. he was the surviving bomber was convicted of the federal death penalty. Uh, it was something to sit through, not only to go through that period of 108-hour long day, but the weeks and months after of the investigation and then that trial. But again, I'll go back to the images, that image of little Martin holding that sign in the photo that so many people saw in the international press, yet unfortunately, having to had seen the photos and the video of the bomb going off and the devastation it wrought to that entire family, let alone little Martin, is something that, it's still to this day makes me get choked up to talk about.
Understandably so. I had no experience or involvement in that incident whatsoever, but it wasn't just about stopping those suspects. Um, it was it was about justice for victims like little Martin there. And when you think about those photos, just remember that you pursued justice for him, and justice, was obtained, was achieved.
Yeah, and what I was, one of the things that stuck with me as a leader in the FBI, even at that point, was just some of the leadership that I saw exhibited by some of our fellow partners, even by some of my own bosses at the time. Our special agent in charge was a guy by the name of Rick Delorier. He's since retired. Uh, just a gentleman's gentleman. The nicest boss I had ever worked for, and he was thrust into the middle of this. You had Ed Davis, who was the commissioner of the Boston Police Department, a giant of a man, giant personality, but just a quiet, firm leadership presence. The colonel of the Mass State Police, another Tim Albin, fantastic. And then, some of the other leaders in the Boston Police Department, Danny Linsky, one of the superintendents, who's still a buddy of mine, Paul Fitzgerald, their clear-eyed ability and experience that they had with something like this in a big city where we were all kind of thrust together. And this was the first time a major U.S. city, outside of 9/11, this was the first time a major U.S. city was essentially shut down for the better part of a week. And there's other stories to tell in relation to that, but for the better part of a week, and which allowed law enforcement to do and get done a lot of things, but it really forced law enforcement leadership to be as tight as ever. And I brought up the Whitey Bulger thing. It was the end of that investigation that really kind of turned the page. Whitey eventually got caught and sent to prison and everything, but that turned the page on the Whitey Bulger era for the FBI in Boston, which was so important.
Right. Right. Out of the tragedy and darkness of an overall incident like this, some of the takeaways that you can have are, there were some positive things. And I'll mention it just by preparation for today. My understanding is there's a foundation called the Martin Richard Foundation. I think it's important to mention that his parents established this back in 2014. And the mission is to honor, Martin's message of peace. And I think that is incredibly important. And in addition to that, my understanding is there's a park in the area that's dedicated and named after Martin. So does that make up for the loss? No. But are those some positives that you can take away from the incident? I firmly believe so.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. The resilience of those victims in that city was really impressive. In fact, the term Boston Strong was obviously born out of that tragedy. And the resilience. So the Martin Richards Foundation, there's what's called the Leg Up Foundation. There's a number of charitable efforts that came together in the wake of that. But one of the things that continued, I want to say in the year or two, or the second or third year after, was this examination of quote unquote what made Boston strong, what contributed to the resiliency. And I give it credit to the spirit of the people in that city and those surrounding communities and towns, the victims certainly themselves, the survivors, the family members, and on the whole, I think the leadership of all these entities that had to come together, because there was, again, my story or my vantage point is one of probably a million in that event. but it was still nevertheless impressive to be witness to of all these other things that touched that event.
Yeah, great point and great perspective. Let's shift. Let's move on to our next, incident that we're going to discuss. Would that be Daphne?
Yep. Daphne Caruana Galizia, a name I was not familiar with at the time, but again, I'll set the stage. In 2017, I was again a legal attaché or legat in Rome, Italy. It had regional responsibility for not only Italy and the Vatican, but this little tiny landlocked country called the Republic of San Marino, which is kind of up in the north of Italy, and then the Mediterranean island of Malta, which is a fascinating
Okay.
place. And I'll be honest, this was a dream assignment. Like I thought I struck gold with going to Cairo, and then struck gold again going to New Hampshire, where my wife is from. And I was able to parlay that into going to Rome, Italy, and got to
Wow.
learn Italian. And what a a blessing of an assignment, both personally again and professionally.
Sure. I would
But
imagine.
everything comes at a cost, right? And with that, it was a busy office. We had a lot of things going on during that assignment. The rash of ISIS terror attacks across Europe were happening, especially later in my assignment, where Europe just experienced a devastating series of ISIL or ISIS-related terror attacks, and nearly every single one of them always had some connection to Italy, which caused us to have to work with our Italian partners.
Mm-hmm.
But early on, though, before all that kicked off, in 2017, we have this incident happen. Now, Malta is interesting because it sits in a geographic place, a tiny island nation between Europe and Africa in the Mediterranean. It's seen as a strategic partnership location. When I got there, because it's regional, it's hard to get down there and really establish relationships. You've got to get down there and be there, and not just be seen as a tourist and somebody that shows up and says, "Hey, what do you got for me?" No, you got to
Right.
be there. You got
Right.
to spend some time on the ground. You got to form relationships. So I was trying to do that. I was still building on that. And in October of 2017, I think I had been to Malta once or twice by that point, with a plan to, in fact, actually go the very following week. But on October 16th, we get a call. My colleague in the office, Kim, who's also since retired, gets a call from our Maltese law enforcement colleagues saying, "Hey, we just had this bombing. It seems it was definitely an assassination of somebody. Can you come like right away?"
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the answer is yeah. We're on our way. Now, we had planned to be down there anyway with a specific training. So we had some of those people inbound, and we told them, "Hey, reroute. Just meet us in Malta. Let's get there, and let's see what we got." And sure enough, what we came to learn, we got on a flight that night. We landed. We go out the next morning with our Maltese partners to the crime scene, and in this field is this mangled piece of metal that used to be a car. Kind of hard to tell it was a car unless you got up close and you could still see tires, but it had been burned through and just charred and destroyed. And what we had learned was the car had been occupied by a woman named Daphne Caruana Galizia. Daphne was a very well-known journalist and blogger on the island of Malta. She reported a lot about corruption. In fact, she was certainly well-known in Malta, but she was well-known in other spheres. And she clearly had been assassinated by a car bomb. What was also learned too, and very sad, was that her son was up in the house. So she left her house and drove down this little hill, and her son was still in the house. He heard the explosion. He came running down and saw the car mangled and on fire, and saw his mother, what was left in the vehicle. So now the Malta Police Service, capable police force. Again, they have their constraints like everybody else, but they had asked us for some very specific help. They also told us, "Hey, we're bringing in Europol. We're getting a team from the Danes. I think it was the Danes, if not the Dutch, to do some forensics, but we want you guys to do this specific thing." And again, I'm not going to go into that for reasons of sensitivities. But yet again, something that was unexpected was this became an international news event like that. And it was because Daphne was known already in the international circuit through her
Okay.
blogging and journalist reporting. And within 36 hours, the entire international media circuit showed up in Malta.
Hmm.
Well, when we showed up, our intent was to help the Maltese with this specific aspect of the investigation. And in fact, having met some of their leadership, I said, look, let me give you some tips and ideas from my own personal experience of dealing with major cases. Here are some considerations. And we started talking about that. And I knew the media had showed up, and I started providing some lessons learned that I had and perhaps some best practices. And again, in another surreal moment, uh, the some of those senior most people just looked at me and they said, "Well, Mr. Kieran, we were just going to have you lead us in the press conference." I said, "Whoa, guys! I mean, I am here to help without a doubt, but A, the FBI is not going to want me to do that, but B, you guys don't want me to do that. I should not be, or the FBI should not be the face of this. The Maltese Police Service should be the face of this." And I say that too because there was a lot of criticism of the Malta Police, unfair criticism in some respects. Other, I don't know. I was still new to interacting with them. But anyway, we talked through that, and I thought we had come up with a plan as to how they were going to deal with it. And we step into this press conference, and right away it was, and we have Mr. Kieran here from the FBI. And I'd already told them I'm not saying anything, and I kept quiet. But there was very quickly I got word from some of my colleagues and bosses like, yeah, this hit the international wire circuit, and they sent me this photo, and it's me in the middle of the senior leaders of the Maltese Police Service with clearly a grimace on my face, like not happy Kieran, sitting
Yeah.
there, and asked, Mr. Kieran from the FBI. And in fact, there was another podcast that did a whole series on Who Killed Daphne, it was called. And in it, in fact, one of the journalists who was there like mocked me for even being there and mocked me for the face I made and everything, which fine, I don't care. But it was just again one of these surreal moments where here's the international media event. You're already dealing with this horrific crime scene. But what a lot of people sometimes forget in the public is the police are trying to take care of the bad thing, right? They're trying to resolve the bad thing, trying to make sure no one else gets hurt, and trying to solve it. But at the same time, now you have the media there. They have to manage the media as well, and that can be
Sure.
very unwieldy sometimes. And having the experience that I've come to have, that was very clear going into this for my colleagues from Malta. But anyway, fast forward, great work by the Maltese Police Service, by the forensic team from Europol, and from the team that we specifically brought in. And they pretty much had this solved within a matter of weeks. In fact, one of the lead investigators from the Malta Police Service, this guy Keith Arnold, he and his colleagues did just a bang up job of putting it all together. But it was pretty clear as day who was responsible, and it kind of revealed this little organized crime syndicate that was not unfamiliar to the Malta Police Service there, that they were responsible, but it actually extended out and had political ramifications, eventually resulting in I think snap elections. It caused the downfall of the administration of the Malta government at the time later. It really there were connections to the Panama Papers, if you recall that. That was a big scandal about
Indeed. Yep.
corruption and banking and everything and money laundering. But again, I'll go back to my images and what sticks with me. And Daphne's family put out a photo of Daphne, and it's clearly one of those very nice photographs, her smiling and looking probably at her best without a doubt. But then again, I contrast it with when we first rolled up, and it was in this like scrub brush little area down a hill. You could see her house up in the distance. But in the middle of this area, clearly the car had been driving along. We could see where the bomb went off because there was a huge divot in the road, and the car had been blown over into this field almost, and just a mangled wreck. And again, I can see still to this day Daphne's face in that photo and that image of the car, and what kind of befell her with that awful bombing.
Yeah. Images again, once again, images you just can't erase. Um, Again, all I can say to this, is that you were part of the pursuit of justice to find out how and why that happened. So, um, just an incredible story, an incredibly unfortunate story.
Yeah, one of the nice things a couple of years ago, a team had been over there from the FBI in Malta, and I guess had met with her son. And I don't know why and what for, but one of those agents reached out to me and said, "Hey, we just came back from Malta, and Daphne's son wanted to say hi and say thank you again." And it was so touching because, look, again, I'm one person, huge team effort. Malta Police Service really did put it together themselves, but the forensic team, our folks, my colleague Kim, who ran Point for Malta, just incredible work to so quickly solve that thing for the benefit of Daphne. Those guys were tried, convicted. I don't know exactly what their fate was ultimately with being sentenced and everything. But even then, I think this is where what bothers me, not only that contrast in images, is that ever going to be enough? Whatever happened to those people, is that ever going to be enough for Daphne's family? Um, I doubt it. I doubt it would be enough for me, right? And I doubt it would be
Right,
enough for you.
right, right. And was it determined that it was the organized crime or a connection there that she was reporting on then?
Yeah, it was the like without getting into the super sticky weeds of this, but this organized crime cell was basically contracted out to do this by some other individuals. And we learned exactly how they did it, where somebody sat, pushed the button, what the device was. I mean, they were able to put it all together pretty succinctly. And it was pretty shocking to see the ramifications it had on the national government, even because the claim that was being made early on was this must be connected to what she was revealing in her reporting. And sure enough, there was truth to that.
Yeah. Well, again, uh, when thinking about this, a positive takeaway, again, it's hard to think what kind of positive takeaways could there be in these types of scenarios, but one is the collaborative, collective effort of law enforcement across the board, to pursue that justice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
Well, let's continue on here. Is this the last individual that we're going to discuss today?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll be honest. I mean, we could continue this conversation with so many other names, and just like so many other law enforcement colleagues could do the same. But we'll end with this one, and it kind of ties into what I do now. And you mentioned I work for a private firm called Global Reach. We do
Hmm.
nothing but try and get Americans out of bad situations, either being held hostage or being wrongfully detained overseas. We do so free of charge. We don't charge families anything. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and we have a great team of people that have some deep experience in this sphere, in this arena, and we're constantly just trying to help people out. In fact, before we were doing this, I was on calls all morning with one of our cases of getting somebody who is, I would tell you unjustly detained right now and has a family, and they're all at risk, and we need to get them out of this. So
Right.
um, that's where this ties into it. Um, and I'll start with the name. The name is Bob Levinson, Robert Levinson, uh, a revered name in across the ranks of the FBI and the halls of the FBI. It's the name Bob Levinson is revered truly, and it's a fairly well-known tragedy at that of a retired FBI agent who traveled to Kish Island, which is part of Iran, was arrested by Iranian authorities, and then disappeared. Just simply was disappeared. Now, the Iranians not only refused to acknowledge holding Bob, but they further dehumanized him and even taunted his family by sending photos and videos of him in various ways, to include one, which is the image that I still focus on of him, fairly gaunt, you know, uh, grown out beard, disheveled hair, in an orange jumpsuit, holding up a sign saying, like, "Why can't you help me?" Mocking the Guantanamo Bay and some other things, but just taunting taunting the U.S. government, taunting the family.
I want to say that when I learned that you were going to discuss this, this is an image that I instantly recalled, and you literally took the word out of my mouth here. When looking at that photo, that beard was so overgrown, his hair was disheveled, and the word you use is gaunt. You could see the desperation and despair in his eyes in that photo. And what really struck me as barbaric from that photo is the one that I remember seeing was he had this like heavy chain around his neck. And I can't remember if the sign that he was holding was connected to that chain or if it was just a chain for effect or torture or whatever. But I can't, and I had no involvement in this. I can't get that image out of my mind.
Yeah, it was a series of images holding up different signs with the chain. You're right. He had a chain. I don't know if the chain was connected to the sign or not. But just taunting the government, taunting his family, dehumanizing him. Uh, and it's a tragedy, truly, this whole entire event and episode. And Bob had a very storied career. He had been in the DEA first, and then had served in the FBI. Uh, and when he went missing, there was tragic infighting and inaction on the part of the U.S. government at the time to really do something effective to get him out of this situation. And the fact that the family is still considers the FBI part of their extended family is amazing, and I'll talk about that in a sec. Now, first off, let me make sure I preface this with I did not know Bob. He retired just as I was coming in to the FBI. I believe I saw him give a presentation. He had already retired. He was an expert in informant development and everything. I think he had come to Seattle just as I had gotten there and done some presentation, as I recall. But fast forward to when he went missing, it became a hot topic across all FBI agents. We were all aware of it, and everybody kept tabs and wanted to know what was happening. And sadly, as the years went by, we started all recognizing and commemorating the anniversary of his disappearance. So in 2019, I left my assignment in Rome, and I took an assignment in the senior executive service at FBI headquarters, and I became what's called the director of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell. Now, this is in effect a giant government task force that has every three-letter agency under the sun in there, along with the military, State Department, you name it, everybody's there. It was formed back in 2014, 2015 as a result of some other barbaric atrocities that happened by ISIS kidnapping other Westerners and doing horrible things to kill them. But with that, Bob's case became part of that portfolio. Now, Bob's case, too, had been worked by so many people in the FBI. The Washington field office really had point on it. They had a whole team that had been dedicated to Bob's disappearance. But there were countless FBI executives that traveled around the world meeting with people. Just an entire huge community of folks that had worked on the Bob Levinson case after year after year. So when I got there in 2019 as this HRFC, and I knew about it, of course, as an FBI agent, I certainly didn't know the nitty gritty and the finer details of everything, but it was really something that I took with great reverence to make sure that, okay, I better not screw this up. He's already been missing for 12 years at this point. He had already been recognized as the longest American held hostage, unfortunately, a distinction that nobody clearly wants, least of all his family, right? But it was something that, Bob's case is a tragedy because of that distinction of becoming the longest American held, and the fact that the Iranians just, after taunting for a little while, then just disappeared him, and we got nothing. Now, admittedly, this is still an active matter. There's, the American government continues to try and hold specific individuals in the Iranian government accountable, let alone the entire Iranian government. There's a lot to be said there, and I won't delve too deep into it. Other than, look, the family in March of 2020 came out and said they accepted that he had presumably perished while in captivity. And this is where my intersection really probably reached its peak. I got a number of occasions to speak to Bob's wife and children, but they were very well versed in dealing with FBI executives since the beginning of this case. So they were personal friends with the director and the deputy director, all my bosses and everything. I was just one of, another 1,000 FBI personnel that were engaging them. But it was something to take perhaps faith in or inspiration in a weird way that Bob had 7 kids, 4 girls, 3 boys, and they were all forces of nature on their own. But to see them together was it was awe-inspiring. The family unit that they were, and the fact that this happened while some of them were children still, kids, and grew up with this to become productive adults, raising their own families, yet still dedicated to the mission of finding out and bringing home their father. Well, in March in 2020, as I said, they came out and made the public announcement that they had accepted that their father had presumably died in custody. It made big news. Unfortunately, I was part of that process and met with them before their meeting with senior U.S. government officials to kind of preview, hey, here's what this is going to be. One of the worst meetings I've ever been to. We met in a hotel lobby. Lots of emotions, understandably. And admittedly, I went home that night, not only feeling some of their pain, because I could never feel all of their pain, but I just felt as if, and I still do, that I was part of the U.S. government failure to bring Bob home. It was just greatly disappointing. And again, I'll go back to the image thing. What remains with me, aside from that anguish and the pain, but yet at the same time to see how productive and how forceful and what great advocates his adult children are now is image, right? And we talked about that image of him gaunt looking in the orange jumpsuit, being forced to hold up this sign, this stupid sign that these Iranian bastards made him hold up, contrasted with a photo that I've seen 100 times, and it's a picture of Bob with his 4 daughters surrounding him. They're all, maybe early adulthood or something. I'm not quite sure, but you can see the pride that he is just beaming with, and how happy they are all. And then you contrast that with that picture of him in the orange jumpsuit, and to feel like, okay, we didn't get him home. And we can't answer that question. And it was a question on one of those, and it was poorly worded, but it was why you cannot help me.
Right.
And that's kind of where the story is.
Right. Those are stark images to recall and reflect on. But I think, again, as you and I both know, as we progress through our careers and you get a little bit older, you realize that some things are beyond your control. Some things are out of your control, no matter how hard you try or no matter how hard you pursue justice. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it is unobtainable at that time. I'm a firm believer in things work out in the end, and good things happen to good people. Horrific incident, but he was a good man with a good family, and eventually this is going to come around, and hopefully that it will be resolved and justice will be achieved. But the only advice I can offer is you just know in your heart that you did everything you could.
Well, and a lot of people did. Again,
Yeah,
I'm one of
absolutely.
probably
Collective
1,000
effort.
FBI people and other folks that tried to get him home. It's again, I just saw something posted by one of his kids on a new effort they're doing. I've seen some news recently of some other official things that are going on with this. And I know that there's a special place in hell for all the bad people that were involved in all these horrible incidents. That
Wholeheartedly
is
believe
waiting.
that.
Every single one of them is awaiting a special welcome for their horrific actions to all of these people that didn't deserve what ultimate fate they were met with.
Yep. Yep. Well, I just want to say, I just want to, take the time for whatever this is worth. Take the time to thank you, not just for sharing these stories here today, but for the years that you spent chasing justice for all these individuals, for these specific people, these victims. They didn't get a chance. You've said it a handful of times. They never got a chance to speak for themselves, but you were out there speaking for them in pursuit of justice. And I can only I can only imagine the weight of carrying, these images in your mind and recalling the names. It's clear you've never forgotten them and probably never will. And that matters. And it matters to the families of these victims, and it matters to the public. And that should matter to you as well. So thank you for your service, your integrity, and your heart in these investigations.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I'd be remiss to say again that there are a lot of people that did a lot of great things and tried a lot of hard things for all of these cases. And quite honestly, I've got, I mean, my list goes on. I could tell you, we could sit here and read the names of the 9/11 victims. We could sit here and talk about other hostage cases that I'm still working on today that, are near and dear to my heart. When I got here in Portland, we had a rash of gang shootings, and we started putting $25,000 rewards on each one of those to show the community we cared and that these people meant something, and justice is important. I think for anybody listening and watching this, especially if you're in law enforcement, it's not about any of these specific cases or anybody's specific actions. It's to your point, Jim, that thank goodness there are people that are willing to put themselves out there for people they've never met, for people they don't know, that are willing to go the extra mile, that are willing to make personal sacrifice to bring justice, because that's such an important doesn't even capture it. It's such a vital thing to know that there are people out there that are going to try and do the right thing for people that have such tragedy forced upon them.
Yep. I echo that sentiment 100%. So definitely. Well, let's transition a little bit here. Let's
You want to talk about
let's
unicorns and rainbows now?
yeah, yeah. Let me get my notes out for that. But let's shift a little bit, we talked about the serious issues. These are very serious issues, very serious investigations, but let's lighten it up a little bit. Let's talk about Kieran. And after your 30 plus year career, like you said, you're retired now. Tell us a little bit more, if you would, if you feel comfortable with the organization you're involved with now, Global Reach.
Yeah, it's a great team. I really am. I feel so privileged and blessed to be part of it. It was born out of what was called the Richardson Center, led by the late Governor Bill Richardson from New Mexico, and who had also been the UN ambassador. He and his chief lieutenant, Mickey, who's now my boss, were involved in the hostage space when I got to that hostage recovery fusion cell, and somebody had asked me, "Hey, are you going to go meet with the Gov and Mickey?" And I'm like, "Who's the Gov and Mickey?" I had no idea. They're like, "Oh, Governor Richardson and Mickey, and they're involved." And I'm like, "Why would I need to meet with them? Like, we're the U.S. government. We're supposed to handle these things." And somebody told me, "No, no, no. You need to learn what this space is like. That there are a lot of advocacy organizations that are very much needed and play a critical role." Because these families that are going through this need as much support as they can, and the U.S. government does not have all the answers, and sometimes gets in its own way of trying to get people home. Well, Bob Levinson is a great example. So
Mm-hmm.
I knew them. This last year, had been thinking about retirement, and ended up having a conversation with some of the folks on this team. The timing worked out, and they offered me a spot to join them. It's a very small team. As I said, we don't charge families anything. We don't solicit cases either. People have to come find us. Unfortunately, we're very much fully employed, but that's not to say we won't take on new cases of Americans that are being held hostage by terrorist groups or state sponsors of terrorism, are Americans that are being wrongfully detained or unjustly held because they're Americans first and foremost, and because whatever entity is holding them is hoping to extract something. Maybe it's monetary, maybe it's some kind of foreign policy concession or something, but is hoping to get something in return for letting this American go, who's arguably usually done nothing wrong. So it's a fascinating space. It's a righteous mission. It's a phenomenal team. And it really is enabled me to transition easily into retirement, being part of such a great group that is doing just righteous work that is mission oriented, and is really trying to help people.
It sounds like a great organization, and embarrassingly so, I'll admit, I wasn't familiar with this organization until you and I kind of became acquainted, and I started doing a little bit of research, and I'm like, that is an impressive organization, and it seems to be perfect for your background, your 30-year career. Kind of, it sounds like that goes hand in hand with global outreach. So I'm glad that something like that worked out for you post FBI employment.
Yeah, that's again, I hope we work ourselves out of a job, quite honestly.
Yeah,
I know that's not the
exactly.
case. I mean, when you again, unfortunately, the world is, as we already talked about, there is evil in the world that exists. The world's a dangerous place. American travelers that go around the world for whatever reasons, for work, for pleasure, tourism, what have you, need to know. They need to be informed travelers. They should very much avail themselves of the resources the U.S. government already provides. There's a website, travel.state.gov, that gives great resources and enables you to register yourself if you're going to any country, even a friendly country like, pick France, Spain, Germany, Canada, whatever, so that if something bad happens to you or something bad happens in the country, even a natural disaster, that's the way the U.S. government knows you're there, that they need to start looking for you. And again, the U.S. government generally goes out of its way to bring Americans home. And we're seeing that now. You'll see it in the news all the time of this person being brought back on a government plane, that person. You want that service if you're the American in a bad situation. However, that doesn't mean there aren't still gaps. That doesn't mean that services aren't still needed to give to the family, because when you're in a situation like that, not only do you have to cope with your family, your loved one being in this horrible situation, not knowing every minute, every hour, every day, every week of what's happening to them, but you have to learn how to navigate the U.S. government bureaucracy, which is enormous. And maybe you have to learn about foreign affairs and foreign policy efforts, and have an understanding, a deeper understanding of how all this intertwines and what it means for your loved one in that horrible situation. And we try and do that. We try and fill in those gaps. And our only mission is bring Americans home. Just get them home, and we don't take any credit for it. I mean, we're not in it for the credit business. My boss wrote a great book called In the Shadows, and that's very much how we operate, in the shadows, to help these families and get these Americans home.
Fantastic. If there were a listener out there that would have a need for your organization, would they simply like Google Global Reach to find contact information?
Yeah, query
Okay.
Global Reach. We have a website on that at the splash page. It tells you about our mission. I don't even think I'm on the website yet. They're still very deliberate about how we do our website and everything. So I think that's still being cleared. But we do have a way to submit an intake to say, and we get them every week. We get a new intake sheet, but there's a way to say, hey, here's the situation on my loved one. We have a bunch of questions we ask, and then we'll correspond with them. Again, we don't take every case. Not every case would meet our parameters. We also, one of our deciders is, can we bring something different or unique to the situation that will help? If we can't, it may not be worth it to have us involved. But we try and do whatever we can. So yeah, we get referrals all the time.
Okay. Um, that it's a fantastic organization. So keep up the good work with that, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me ask this. We're going to bring it to a close here, but yeah, I'm just curious if you have any interest to just maybe briefly discuss the current direction of the Bureau now. I mean, you invested blood, sweat, and tears over your career in the agency. What are your thoughts, if any, if you're comfortable, uh, sharing what you think of the direction now?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. One, with every presidential administration transition comes change, right? It's inevitable. Change is
Hmm.
inevitable in that regard for every government agency, and change is hard. But not all change is bad. So there are some good things happening. However, what I get frustrated about as a veteran of the FBI from the highest levels and personally knowing the former director and the former deputy director, I worked for 5 directors over my career. Have had various interactions with all of them, but most recently, the last director, I know who he is as a man and who he was as a leader. And I was very hurt and frustrated to hear these labels of us being weaponized and politicized. I believe they're absolutely false. I take no stock in them. I think they can easily be swatted back and clearly, that's not to say that the FBI hasn't made missteps. They have, without a doubt. But for every misstep the FBI makes, they learn from it. I mean, we have a policy book that is extensive because of usually some misstep to make sure it doesn't happen again. And there's a core ethos in the FBI of leadership, and there was a core leadership, or there was a core ethos of values attached to that leadership premise. So I'll start from that perspective. Um, the current leadership of the FBI is making a lot of changes. As I said, not all change is bad. There are some things that certainly could be improved. I just want to make sure that it is deliberate, that it is thought through, that it is supportive of the employees, of the men and women of the FBI, the ranks of the FBI at all levels, and that it is for the betterment of the FBI mission and not just performative in some way, shape, or form, given the political zeitgeist that we find ourselves in. So very carefully wording the fact that, look, I am the biggest cheerleader for the FBI today, now that I'm on the outside. Admittedly, sometimes it's a little difficult to realize I'm on the outside now looking in, and I have to cheer them on from the sidelines. But, there are, by default, the FBI has hired exceptional people over the years. And I have no doubt those exceptional people that are in the FBI today will rise to the occasion that they need to, and that will always realize the core mission of the FBI is sacrosanct: to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. And that sacrosanct mission cannot be messed with for whatever reason in any major way at all. So I'm going to continue to cheer on my colleagues and hope that the FBI continues to serve the American people according to that mission statement.
Well said. Well said. Well, it's clear to me you've worked the front lines of fighting crime and evil your entire career, taking on some of the, taking on some of the most serious investigations around the world, clearly from our conversation today. And we didn't, I'm confident, even touch. We just touched on a small amount. So, I want to end with saying this. I just want to thank you for your service to keep our country safe. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jim. And again, I'm so glad we crossed paths in the way that we did. And again, the world's a great place. It's a small place. I love the fact that we connected the way we did. I'm a big fan of your podcast now. I hadn't known about it until the Tony episode, but I've gone and watched the other ones. We have other connections that I think we chatted about. You
Yep.
interviewed one of the guys up in Seattle that he and I did know each other, but his partner from Seattle PD became my partner later. So we knew each other. Jerry Williams, you just had on. She's a legend now with her own podcast about FBI files.
Right.
So it's great to see. But again, I have a special place in my heart for you because we're former customs agents. That was a phenomenal agency. Again, not to say that HSI isn't a great agency now, and they're going through their own changes and
Absolutely.
refocus of the mission and reordering of things. But U.S. Customs back in the day was a phenomenal agency. And as I said from the outset, and I said it intentionally, the good agents you knew were always the good people. And that's one of the things I missed about that agency.
Yep. Again, I echo your sentiment there, and I'll end with that. I appreciate that. Well, let me transition to the listeners here. Uh, I just want to say, as always, I would just ask that you please like, follow, subscribe, and share my social media out there. That helps me continue to bring top caliber guests like Kieran Ramsey to the podcast to share his story. I appreciate that. So everybody stay safe out there.
Thanks, Jim.
The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences, just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.